Chapter 337. Ferd South City, Wizard Tower. The Hall of Puppets, located on the 7th floor of Grimm's residence, was still bustling with activity. In the center of the hall, a majestic, giant metal spider was crouching on the floor, and the scaffolding beside it was densely packed with sorcerer apprentices who were hard at work. After working day and night without rest, the full metal body of the spider golem that Grimm had personally designed was finally completed. After the dwarven construction team left, Grimm recruited a large number of apprentices from the Wizard Tower and began to etch runes on the spider golem. The spider golem was now just a lump of metal. In order to make it listen to its master's commands, many control runes had to be etched all over its body, such as energy transmission lines, sturdy runes, elemental resistance runes, consciousness control centers, energy storage nodes. The main body of the spider golem was a disc-shaped cockpit with a diameter of 5 meters. The outer shell was made of magic iron alloy that was half a meter thick, and the inner structure was made of mechanical gears made of magic machinery. This way, not only could it reduce the consumption of magic iron alloy, but could also make it more flexible than a normal magic puppet. Grimm had studied most of the golems and magic puppets of the Silver Alliance. In order to achieve a higher degree of sturdiness, they would use a full metal body. The golems created this way would only have a few joints that could move within a small range, sacrificing flexibility in exchange for an indestructible defense. This was not wrong. After all, the role of magic puppets in the Silver Alliance was to be used as cannon fodder. If long-range attackers were needed, the elemental puppets could be used. Therefore, these metal lumps did not need to be flexible. As long as they were sturdy enough to withstand the attacks of a large number of enemies, it would be fine. When Grimm was creating the spider golem, he had considered its ability to pass through all terrain and its ability to support attacks on the battlefield. As for its defense, although the half-meter-thick magic iron alloy was not indestructible, Grimm estimated that it would take at least 2 or 3 wizard-level stone puppets 15 minutes to damage the spider golem's shell. And with this effort, the Inferno Tyrant, who was cooperating with the spider puppet beasts in battle, would probably have already turned the surrounding 1 kilometer into a terrifying sea of fire. Therefore, after much consideration, Grimm felt that there was no need to continue strengthening the spider puppet monster's defense. Instead, it was necessary to improve its mobility and attack methods. Otherwise, an enemy's quagmire spell could turn this gold-devouring behemoth into a pile of immobile scrap metal. In this regard, the spider form with multiple limbs and good balance was the best choice. Modifying the spider puppet beast was not a small task. Most of the important runes and circuits needed to be etched into the inner metal layer. The spider's limbs also needed to be engraved with runes of toughness, sharpness, and other effects. This was the only way to avoid the damage to the rune circuits, which would cause the entire spider puppet monster to fail. When Alice hid in the cockpit, there was a thick metal barrier, so it was a huge problem for her to monitor her surroundings in real time. To solve this problem, Grimm added a 1-meter-wide metal ball to the front of the spider puppet monster's disc-shaped cockpit. He then hollowed it out and filled it with many magical gems, turning it into a beehive-like spider head. Scouting crystals, laser stones, giant rubies that could emit scorching rays, shield crystals that could activate defensive force fields, and the 2 eyes of petrification that could activate the power of petrification. In short, in order to improve the spider puppet monster's survival and combat abilities, Grimm searched through his gem vault and used all the magical gems that could be used. Not to mention the magic iron alloy required to create the spider puppet monster. Just the magical gems alone were worth more than 30,000 magic crystals. From this, it could be seen how much effort Grimm had put into ensuring Alice's safety. While Grimm was busying himself in the puppet hall, Alice was leisurely playing with her divination skills. Yes, she was playing with it. After such a long period of exploration, Alice had a deeper understanding of divination. What were its advantages and disadvantages? What were its disadvantages? How should divination be used effectively? She had answers to these questions one after another. First of all, there were no gods in the sorcerer world. This was the most important point. The absence of a god meant that there was no super life above Alice's head that could control her completely. Therefore, the feedback that Alice received every time she performed divination was not a gift from the gods, but a feedback brought to her by the plane's laws based on some unknown power of loss. In other words, whenever she used this divination spell, she was not dealing with an extraordinary creature with super intelligence, but a cold and emotionless plane's law system. Recently, Alice had been using up her divination quota every day and repeatedly testing this so-called plane's law system. It had to be said that for a little grade 1 witch like her, the vastness and strictness of the plane's law system had far exceeded her imagination. With the same content and the same time, the feedback from the plane's law system could be completely different, and sometimes it could even be completely opposite. The stronger the person involved in the divination request, the more vague the feedback would be. Sometimes, there would be no feedback at all. In short, with Alice's current strength, she would not be able to get any feedback from Magi of rank 2 and above. Even if the divination was successful, the feedback would mostly be vague and difficult to use. However, when facing opponents of the same rank as her, Alice's divination still played a big role. Alice's divination success rate for elite wizards was less than 30%, which meant that only 2 out of 5 divination quotas would be successful each day. When it came to ordinary wizards, Alice's success rate could reach 70%, which meant that at least 3 out of 5 divination quotas would be successful. As for those who were below the level of wizards, Alice's success rate was 90%. As for Xue Fu, who could pose a threat to her, he was unfortunately below the level of a magus. Therefore, during this period of time, Alice, who had figured out the characteristics of divination, became the most sinister little woman. She hid in her room every day and peeped at her future opponent's privacy. Yes, peeping. Basically, Alice's 5 divinations every day revolved around this shave. What was it like? What elements did Chef have affinity with? What kind of sorcery was Chef good at? What kind of personality did Chef have? What kind of powerful weapon did Chef have? What kind of fighting habits did Chef have? If she only considered these basic information, Alice would be able to understand her opponent in less than 3 to 4 days. But after understanding all of this, Alice's divination prayer had already become, what was Chef's favorite color? How many times did Chef take a bath a day? What was Chef's size? How many times did Chef go to the toilet a day? The year of her menarche. Did she have any experience in that area? And for this information, every time Alice succeeded in her divination, she would use a special small notebook to record it. So, relying on the fate puzzle again and again, Alice spent a lot of time and energy and finally outlined a lifelike image of Chef in her mind. Natural affinity with the ice element, outstanding talent, calm, intelligent, beautiful Chef had shown outstanding talent in ice and snow since she was a child, so she was specially sent to the Winter Witch territory by her grandmother, Angelina, who was a rank 4 witch. She studied and grew up there, and only returned to the family territory after she became a Destiny, which these years. Although her life was short, it contained many important elements that even Alice was envious of. So, the more Alice knew about her, the more she could not help but like such a successful girl. But what Alice did not know was that because of her frequent harassment during this period of time, she had almost driven this competitor, Chef, crazy. To be honest, if not for her identity as a Destiny Witch candidate, perhaps Chef, who was hundreds of thousands of miles away, would not have been able to sense Alice's nonsense. 2 girls with different personalities and different fates, one in the central part of the Magus continent, the other in the northern part of the Magus continent, separated by hundreds of thousands of miles. They had never met each other, and it was impossible for them to know each other. But at this moment, they were forcibly twisted together by the power of fate. Every time Alice successfully performed divination related to Chef, who was far away in the extreme north, would suddenly feel a chill in the depths of her heart, no matter where she was. It was like a bone-chilling ghost hand reaching into her clothes, slowly groping her body, drilling into her secrets. When she was deep in meditation in the ice cave, her meditation would be interrupted by a sudden surge of fear. When she was practicing ice witchcraft, her casting would be interrupted by a disturbed state of mind, when she closed her eyes to take a nap, she would be suddenly awakened by an unexpected stimulus. Even when she hid in her mother's wizard tower, it was difficult to isolate this sudden fear from an unknown source. It was fine for the first few days. This kind of uninvited alarm was still somewhat regular. But in the end, it was completely chaotic. It would come when she was eating, when she was sleeping, when she was meditating, and even when she was bathing or going to the toilet. It would appear inexplicably. It made her extremely angry, but there was nothing she could do. Due to the inexplicable interference, Chef's meditation progress was obviously much slower. Chapter 338. If it wasn't necessary, Che was extremely reluctant to get close to Agatha. Ever since she could remember, she had always felt that Agatha was somewhat gloomy and mysterious. She hid in her hut all day long and played with some inexplicable evil things. But what made her helpless was that Agatha was also recognized as the most accurate witch in divination among the deceit witches. Due to her eccentric personality and ugly appearance, Agatha was not very well liked by the deceit witches. So most of the year, she stayed in the haunted hut in the whispering forest in the west of the city. This was already the hinterland of the deceit witches' territory. Logically, there shouldn't be any overly powerful monsters or monsters. But because of the existence of the haunted hut and Agatha, the whispering forest had become a terrifying, forbidden area for ordinary people. Even ordinary witches would not be willing to set foot in this place. So when Chave landed at the entrance of the whispering forest on her broom, she had to hesitate for a while before making up her mind to walk in. Agatha's haunted hut was a full 7 miles away from the entrance of the forest. Chave didn't land early out of respect for the witches. Instead, the whispering forest also had its own evil aspects. Looking down from the sky, all one could see was the silent forest and the fog that never dissipated. Although Agatha's reputation was not good in the family, in the eyes of ordinary people, she had a different view. Agatha was good at herbs and divination. For ordinary people who bravely entered the whispering forest and were lucky enough to find the haunted hut, as long as they could pay the price, they could ask her for medicine to save their loved ones or ask her to do some divination. And to do this, it was not easy for ordinary people. At least when Chave walked into the whispering forest, she saw 4 to 5 narrow paths hidden in the thick fog, and a road sign that was slanted on the side of the road. Because no one had taken care of it for a long time, the road sign was covered with withered plants and vines. It was also covered with dust and broken cobwebs. The grayish-black writing was already blurred and difficult to read. Xue Fu walked over and stretched out her hand to pull lightly. The withered vines broke into countless pieces and scattered around. Just as Xue Fu was about to wipe away the dust on the sign to identify the location of the haunted house, an ear-piercing screech above her gave her a fright. A strange black crow flew down from the sky and landed on the tip of the wooden fork of the road sign. It tilted its neck and stared at her coldly with blood-red eyes. Red-eyed ravens were one of the most common low-level monsters in the forest. Xue Fu sensed the special energy of the eye of witchcraft from the red-eyed raven. "Your Excellency Agatha, Shefu has come to visit you. I hope to see you," Shefu said respectfully. Other than the Agatha, there was no one else who could have planted spies in the Forest of Whispers. "So, it's Xue Fu. I remember you. You're Rena's daughter, Angelina's granddaughter. I can't believe you've grown so much in 10 years. The red-eyed raven tilted its head and sized her up. With a hoarse voice, it said, "Since you're here, just come over. Just follow Felix. I'll be waiting for you at the haunted house." With that, the red-eyed raven flapped its pitch-black wings and soared into the sky, flying towards the depths of the forest. There were 4 or 5 paths in front of it, but the red-eyed raven did not fly towards any of them. Instead, it spread its wings and flew towards a tall ghost tree whose leaves were about to fall off. What was strange was that the red-eyed raven ignored the eerie and terrifying tree in front of it and charged into it, disappearing into the thick fog. Illusion? Xue Fu could only follow behind it quickly and brace herself to pass through the illusion barrier. Her eyes lit up. After passing through the illusion barrier, the gloomy and depressing forest once again returned to its normal appearance. There were tall, verdant ancient trees, lush green lawns, and many strange, unknown flowers. The sun could not be seen in the sky, but the bright sunlight shone through the mottled shadows of the trees, leaving an indeterminate light and shadow on the grassland. Under the guidance of the red-eyed raven, Fu went deeper into the forest. Along the way, they saw large patches of herb gardens and gardens, which were filled with lush plants and flowers. Of course, there were even more strange herbs that they couldn't name. Turning left and right in the forest, passing through one botanical garden after another, herb garden after another, Che finally turned a corner and saw an abandoned house hidden in thick fog. The wooden house was about 2 stories high and looked old and broken. From the cracks in the walls, she could see the flickering light of candles. As the slanted wooden door creaked open, an ugly old witch with a hunched back leaned on a cane and stared at Fu silently. The dim candlelight shone from behind her, casting more and more shadows on her face. But even so, Fu's enhanced vision allowed her to see clearly. Under the gray pointy hat and the dirty, old witch robe, the wrinkled skin, the hooked nose like an eagle's beak, the cold, muddy eyes of a dead fish, and the incomplete yellowed teeth were reflected in the eyes of the witch. With the strength of witches, as long as they were willing to spend some time and resources, they could all have a decent appearance and body. For her to be willing to maintain such a disgusting appearance, it was either because she had been in contact with highly toxic or radioactive items, or she had a twisted mind that outsiders could not understand. Agatha's attire was also a traditional witch's attire. With the improvement of witchcraft and the popularization of witchcraft tools, such attire was rarely seen. Only some of the more conservative witches were still working hard to maintain the traditions of the ancient witches. At the moment, Fu was wearing a light blue dress. Other than a few small ornaments with witchcraft waves, there were not many accessories related to witches. Looking closely, she was like an ice beauty with a delicate and spiritual temperament. It was hard to believe that she was actually a probationary witch with the strength of a prospective wizard. "Come in." Agatha opened the door. "Since you came here, you must have something to do. Come in and talk." The environment inside the house was similar to its appearance. Not only was it dark and damp, but it was also eerie and scary. In the corners of the wooden house, there were piles of wooden boxes and glassware of all sizes. As for the soup pot, stove, experiment table, and crooked wooden table, these were all common things in a witch's house. Agatha moved to the soup pot with difficulty and stirred the muddy soup with a wooden spoon covered with grease. She scooped a spoonful and tasted it. "Tell me, what are you doing here? Divination or making potions?" "Your Excellency, Agatha, I've been entangled by someone using divination recently. I can't get rid of it, so I want to borrow your power." Fu hesitated for a moment and finally said her purpose. "Divination?" Agatha raised her head in surprise and stared at Fu with her dead fish-like eyes. "Impossible. You have Angelina's blessing on you. Ordinary divination can't work on you at all. Maybe the other party is not using ordinary divination?" Agatha took a step forward and leaned in front of Fu. She lifted her nose and sniffed. It's really strange. Why do I smell a trace of fate?" Agatha raised her head and stared at her in astonishment. "I heard that you have awakened the bloodline of the Witch of Destiny a while ago. It is reasonable to say that you should be favored by fate at this time. But why do I smell the curse of fate on you?" Fu hesitated for a moment and finally spoke. "Grandmother Angelina is worried that I won't be able to successfully pass the battle of fate. She has already sent people all over the continent to clean up the awakened ones." "Stupid." Agatha banged the wooden staff in her hand on the floor. "She is the leader of the Deceit Witches and a powerful grade 4 witch. How could she do such a stupid thing?" At this moment, Agatha seemed so distressed. Did she forget the rules left by the Witch King? How dare she intervene in the internal affairs of the Destiny Witches? The inheritance of the Destiny Witches has been broken for nearly 1,000 years. Now is the time for them to rise again. This is the top priority that all the northern witches need to pay attention to, and the chief is so obviously involved. Isn't she worried that she will be cursed by fate and implicate the entire deceit witches? Xue Fu lowered her head, and her crystal-clear snow-white face was also gloomy. Turning to look at Xue Fu, Agatha couldn't help but stamp her feet and sigh. Ahem, it seems that no matter how powerful a witch is, when she faces the test of blood relatives, she will make such a stupid mistake. This is all fate. Lady Agatha, the inheritance of the Destiny Witches has been broken for so long. I'm afraid that the influence it brings will not be too big, right? What does a little girl like you know? It is precisely because they have been broken for too long that their return this time is all the more worth looking forward to. According to the agreement between the ancient witches and the laws of the plane, the lost inheritance will return after 1,000 years of accumulated power. Do you think its influence will be small? Don't forget, this time the awakening of the Destiny Witches covers the entire wizard continent. Even the farthest south can hear the news of the awakened witches. Isn't this enough to explain everything? Lady Agatha, then I understand. Agatha sighed. The more your grandmother does for you, the deeper the curse of the law of fate will be on you. No wonder you are deeply troubled by divination. Well, since you are here, I can't let you go back empty-handed. For the sake of the same deceit witches, I will help you see which blind guy has been spying on you. Chapter 339. The junk on the wooden table was pushed to the ground by Agatha. In a narrow space, she took out a crystal ball and placed it on top. Come on, put your hand on it. Hearing Agatha's instructions, Chave hesitated for a moment. She stretched out her slender, white, translucent hands and gently held the crystal ball. There was a faint white mist in the crystal ball that was rushing back and forth, as if it was trying to break through the crystal wall. Chave's hands could even feel the crystal ball trembling slightly under the impact of the mist. As if sensing the breath of life, the white mist in the crystal suddenly stopped and transformed into the face of a vicious woman. She opened her mouth full of sharp teeth and fiercely bit toward Chave. Even though there was a solid and transparent crystal wall between them, Chave was still scared and withdrew her hands. Vengeful spirit. A sorcerer-level vengeful spirit. If she was infected by such a vengeful spirit, even with her strength, she would probably have nightmares for 10 days to half a month. Don't worry, Liz is very gentle and cute. She was just joking with you. A creepy smile appeared on Agatha's ugly face, and an equally ugly toad jumped out of her sleeve with a croak. The toad hopped forward on the table and finally jumped onto the crystal ball, lying on top of it without moving. Say hello to it. This is my companion, Wendy. Isn't she cute too? Agatha's smile became more and more sweet. The ugly toad was only the size of a fist, and its purplish-black body was covered with large and small abscesses and disgusting mucus. It had big red eyes and a white belly. Its belly was bulging, and it looked no different from its kind in the mud. Damn you, Agatha. You've caused us big trouble again. The ugly toad suddenly spoke with a sweet and childish voice. She has a strong smell of the curse of fate on her. Do you also want to attract the attention of the law of fate? Wendy, don't talk so much nonsense, Agatha said coldly. This girl's grandmother is the leader of the deceit witches. If you don't want to be chased out of the forest of whispers with me, do something useful. The toad bulged its belly and uttered a series of strange, unpleasant syllables, as if it were complaining and cursing something. But as soon as it turned around, it glared at Chef with its huge red eyes. You're a talented little girl. Even if you don't awaken your destiny talent, you can still become a powerful witch in the future. From the looks of it, the law of destiny choosing you doesn't seem like some kind of luck, but more like a damned curse. All right, let's not talk about useless things. Little girl, place your hand on the crystal ball and wait for the fortune teller to arrive. That fortune teller would attack me 5 times a day, and most of the times would be when I'm feeling the most uncomfortable. In half an hour, it will be my daily meditation time. At that time, it will definitely activate once. Xue Fu's beautiful eyes flashed with anger. It was obvious that she hated that fellow's actions. Half an hour passed in the blink of an eye. Shui Fu, who was holding the crystal ball without saying a word, suddenly shuddered. She once again sensed that strange feeling that made her feel annoyed yet helpless. In the crystal ball in her hand, a fluorescent light suddenly lit up in the white fog, dispersing the fog in an instant. It showed a strange scene where she didn't know where she was. Looking at the scene, it seemed to be a magic secret room. It was empty inside, without any special decorations. And in the middle of the secret room, a cute little girl who looked only 8 or 9 years old was crouching on the ground, using a platinum hammer to break a tortoise shell. As if she sensed something, the cute little girl suddenly raised her head and looked at the secret room in surprise. Her beautiful and slightly sly gaze passed through an unknown channel, through the crystal ball, and collided with Shui Fu's sullen and cold gaze. Using the treacherous fate connection, the two awakened of destiny in different parts of the Sorcerer Continent could see each other from completely different perspectives and temporarily linked their minds together. Are you the one who's been spying on my life? Stop it, Your Excellency, or else. Shui Fu looked at this mysterious enemy, with a hint of curiosity in her anger. When she felt the other party's sorcerer-level spiritual undulations, her heart unknowingly tightened. Or else what? Send someone to kill me? Alice, who was on the other side of the mental channel, shouted with a slightly sharp voice, "It's not like you haven't done something like this before. Thanks to you, I've already been killed by your family once. So, now, please bear the backlash of fate." Shui Fu's face became even paler and more transparent. She, who usually thought highly of herself, had always been disdainful of these plots and schemes. Although she heard that her grandmother and mother had made some arrangements behind the scenes, she was too lazy to understand and participate. Now that she suddenly heard Alice's angry accusation, her heart tightened. She faintly felt that the connection between her soul and the law of fate had been broken. In the void, Shui Fu seemed to hear a death cry and angry curse from a faraway country. Another destiny which candidate had died, and her death seemed to have an inextricable relationship with her family. Did you hear that? This is the cry of fate, and also your death knell. Alice also sensed the change in the distance. The more your family does for you, the further away you are from your destiny. Do you really think that by killing all the candidates, you can successfully become the only witch of fate? Ha ha ha. I really don't know what the law of fate chose you as a candidate. Everything you do goes against fate. I can't wait to see your tragic fate. Shui Fu's hands holding the crystal ball were trembling. She had always believed in herself and not fate. But at this moment, at the most intense moment of the collision of fate, she seemed to be able to see through the endless void and the bizarre river of time to the moment when her life would end. Her body had a huge bloody hole, and her hair and robe were burned to ashes by the terrifying fire. In a moment she was powerless. A cute and delicate girl's face kept swaying in front of her. It's her. The one who killed her was this hateful little witch in front of her. Just as Shui Fu's body was trembling and her mind was in a trance, a terrifying woman's face suddenly appeared on the back of the toad that had been lying on the crystal ball. It looked like the sorcerer-level, vengeful spirit Alice who was originally trapped in the crystal ball. The toad opened its huge mouth, and a long and sticky tongue shot out like lightning, piercing straight into Shui Fu's forehead and deep into her skull. But strangely, not a single drop of blood flowed out. Then, with Agatha's muffled and hoarse incantation, the terrifying vengeful spirit and a large mass of dark curses flowed into Shui Fu's mind through the tunnel made by the tongue. Then, it followed the strange and unpredictable fate connection and passed into the distance. With a piercing scream, Alice suddenly held her head and began to roll on the ground in pain. Poof! The scene in the crystal ball suddenly dimmed and disappeared, and the trace of fate connection in the dark was also broken. On the other side, Shui Fu could not withstand the backlash of fate, and her vision turned black as she fainted. South Felder City, Magus Tower. After a quarter of an hour, Grimm once again appeared in Alice's residence. What appeared in front of him was a crazy girl who was rolling on the ground and babbling nonsense. "Help me, I think I'm being controlled by a vengeful spirit. Damned sorcerers, damned humans. You're all going to die. Go to hell. Suddenly, two completely different voices came from the same body. One was Alice's, and the other was hoarse and low, filled with thick malice. At the same time, countless black spots suddenly appeared on Alice's delicate white skin. These black spots appeared very strangely, as if they had drilled out from the deepest part of Alice's body, and there was a tendency for them to spread. As they spread rapidly, they quickly turned into huge, festering, and terrifying abscesses. Blood bubbles filled with purplish-black blood and pus kept swelling, and then burst one after another. The black blood that splattered was pungent, and the entire secret room was filled with an unbearable stench. As for Alice, she was tortured to the point of hovering between life and death. Her eyes rolled back, and she fainted. As soon as Grimm got close, before he could even figure out what was going on, Alice abruptly jumped up again. Her delicate and adorable face was distorted beyond recognition. She extended her sharp claws and pounced at Grimm in a frenzy. "I want to kill you. I want to kill you." Muttering incoherently, Alice's eyes rolled back, as if she had been possessed by an evil spirit. Grimm pointed with his finger, and a dense flame chain appeared out of thin air, suspending the violent and agitated Alice in midair, restricting her movements. A few acolytes who had just arrived exclaimed in shock, and they stared at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. "What are you standing there for? Quickly go and get Magus Winley," Grimm berated in a low voice. Thus, a few acolytes hurriedly rushed out. "Hey, Chip, check on Alice and see what's wrong with her," Grimm ordered in a bad mood. This Alice was a real troublemaker. He was still forging a construct puppet for her that could save her life, but she was inexplicably ambushed in her heavily guarded residence. Following a strong blue flash in his eyes, Chip quickly completed the scan on Alice's body. Beep. Alice's examination report completed. Initial conclusion: possessed by an evil spirit, coupled with a dark curse the source can no longer be traced. I can sense an extremely strong and frightening resentment in Alice's body. I suggest you hurry up and get rid of it. In addition, I can also sense 127 dark curses that are tightly intertwined with each other. I suggest you hurry up and get rid of it. Damn, Alice, what did you do? How did someone stuff so many curses and resentment into your body? Chapter 340. Professional matters could only be dealt with by professionals. If it was just a normal curse, a bottle of purification potion that cost 40 magic crystals would be enough to deal with it. But Alice had obviously stirred up a hornet's nest, and it was a huge one at that. Therefore, Grimm could only invite Farrell, the potion maker that the Cerubo family had carefully trained. Half an hour later, a huge medicine pot was set up in Alice's house, and precious herbs were thrown into it. When the fire was almost done, Farrell stuffed Alice inside. Troublesome. Very troublesome. Even Farrell could not help but shake her head when she saw the lingering resentment and curses in Alice's body. In order to get rid of the resentment, one had to first get rid of the entangled curses, and in order to get rid of the curses, one had to endure the crazy attacks of the resentment. It was really troublesome. Fortunately, Alice was a divination which had lost all her attacking abilities. In order to make her stay in the potion pot, Grimm had no choice but to take out her eyes of petrification and forcefully turn her into a stone person and stuff her into the potion pot. Using this time, Grimm went to Moda City to visit a necromancer in exchange for a special tool that could get rid of spiritual creatures. There was no other way. The Cerubo family did not have a dedicated necromancer, so they could only ask for help when encountering such a troublesome spiritual resentment. Even Farrell was only a potion maker, not a professional cursemancer. However, her ability also involved a lot of knowledge about dispelling curses, so Grimm could only ask her to save Alice. After returning from Moda City, Grimm removed the petrification on Alice's body without saying a word. Before the resentment in her body exploded, he stabbed a black dagger into her forehead. The dagger was as long as a palm, but strangely, not a single drop of blood flowed out. As soon as the dagger stabbed into her forehead, Alice shivered and got rid of the evil spirit's possession. That's scary. Alice held the edge of the medicine pot with both hands and only her head above the soup. She asked Grim in shock, "What did you use to save me? Why do I feel dizzy?" Grim ignored her and tilted his head slightly. Merrill, who had been guarding them, brought a mirror over and placed it in front of Alice. Alice almost fainted with just one look. Strange runes flowed out of the black dagger that was stabbed into her forehead and then drilled into her brain through the tip of the dagger. That strange and treacherous place was enough to make one shudder with fear. Just as Alice was about to touch the dagger, Grim couldn't help but snort coldly. "If you want to die, then go ahead and touch me. If you pull out, I guarantee that your head will explode in a spectacular way. Then how long do I need to hold this thing? Why do I feel that with it around, it's hard for me to even think?" If it wasn't for the fact that it locked most of your consciousness, do you think you could break free from the entanglement of resentment? Tell me, how did you provoke a curse wizard this time? I did not provoke the curse magus. Then where did these things come from? I've been spying on that competitor. She should be the candidate that the deceit witches want to push to the throne of the Witch of Destiny. And then, she hired an unknown person to deal with me. I was defeated before I could even see what that person looked like. You should feel lucky that the thing that entangled your body was only a sorcerer's resentment wave. If your enemy was more ruthless and directly sent that spirit over, I'm afraid you would have died in less than a quarter of an hour. Grim muttered to himself, "Looks like there's a chance to buy some artifacts that can resist spirits and curses. Otherwise, it'll be really hard to deal with this kind of situation in the future. Yes. I mentioned this a long time ago. It's you who didn't pay enough attention to it." Ouch! Alice could not help but lean on the edge of the roof to expose her neck. Who knew that as soon as this part of her body was exposed to the soup, the skin that had already scabbed over suddenly bulged with countless bloody blisters, revealing a terrifying festering wound. This caused Alice, who had been ferocious just a moment ago, to grimace in pain and return to the pot of medicine. The green medicinal soup mixed with the blood that kept bursting out, making Alice feel like she was in so much pain that she wanted to die. "I hate you. I hate you. I hate you." Alice angrily exposed her mouth and roared towards the sky. "I curse you to suffer for eternity." These mournful cries that sounded like tears of blood were faintly spreading into the distance through invisible and hidden paths. "What's going on?" The beautiful witch, who had just arrived at the haunted house, saw Chave lying unconscious on the bed and asked angrily. Although this, which was more than 200 years old, due to proper maintenance, her delicate face was still as beautiful as ever. Her voluptuous figure was even more curvaceous under the gorgeous sorcerer's robe, which was abnormally alluring. However, she was very concerned about Chave, and the concern and urgency in her eyes could not be concealed. She was also a terrifying rank 2 witch. "Lady Rena, Miss Chave's backlash has stabilized. You don't have to worry about this." Agatha, who was only a rank 1 witch, was no longer as mysterious and strange as before. She explained to Chave's mother with a smile on her face. Lady Rena's talent was also very ordinary. It was only because Angelina spared no effort and resources to nurture her that she barely became a rank 2 witch. At this stage, her potential for advancement had been completely exhausted, and it was no longer possible for her to take even half a step forward on the path of a wizard. It was precisely because of this factor that she would crazily seek pleasure under Angelina's strict orders. She adopted male pets everywhere, and, at the same time, had ambiguous relationships with several wizards in the family. By a stroke of luck, she finally gave birth to Chave, a daughter with extraordinary wizard talent. It was also because of this contribution that Rena's status in the family rose, and she became a real power figure in the territory that no one dared to provoke. Perhaps it was because Chave meant too much to her. When she found out that Chave was accidentally involved in the Battle of Destiny, she could not bear the fear in her heart and desperately begged her mother, the rank 4 witch Angelina, the leader of the Deceit Witches, to take the initiative to intervene in the selection of the Witches of Destiny. So when she heard the news of Chave suddenly fainting, she hurried to Agatha's haunted house. She repeatedly checked Chave's condition and found that her body was fine, but her mental fluctuations were weak and slow, and from time to time, she would burst out with one or two hoarse cries. It was as if she had fallen into some kind of nightmare. "Is this what you meant by stability?" Rena could not help but scream angrily. "My daughter has extraordinary talent. Even Mother herself praised her for this. And she also has Mother's blessing on her. How could she fall into a nightmare and be unable to extricate herself? Tell me, did you do something?" In the face of this angry rank 2, who was in charge of all the affairs in the territory, Agatha could only desperately smile. "Lady Rena, this is the best I can do. You have to know, Miss Chave has suffered a serious fate backlash, and in the spiritual link with the fortune teller, she seems to have seen some bad things, and her mental consciousness has suffered a strong impact. At this time, staying in the nightmare is the best choice. If you rashly wake her up, I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "I'm afraid that her mental body will suffer a heavy blow. Will it endanger her potential to advance?" When this was mentioned, the fierce Rena immediately became nervous again. Agatha nodded with a serious expression. Damn it, damn it, damn it." Rena paced around the house anxiously. "I knew it would be like this. Agatha, tell me the location of that damn fortune teller. I'll send someone to tear her into pieces." Agatha's hunched body trembled inexplicably. After thinking for a moment, she said with difficulty, "Lady Rena, I suggest that you don't do this." "Why?" Rena stopped abruptly, her beautiful face filled with killing intent. "To put it bluntly, it's because of what you did for Miss Chave that things have become a little difficult to understand. The more candidates you send to kill, the more severe the rejection from the law of fate will be on Miss Chave, and correspondingly, the other fate candidates will receive more care from fate. Haven't you noticed that the more candidates you kill, the more the remaining candidates will become sorcerers in a short period of time? This is the balance of fate. Humph. We Deceit Witches never believe in fate." Rena snorted coldly. "But Miss Chave has to believe in it." Agatha explained patiently. "Miss Chave's talent is outstanding, and she never lacks resources. But why are all the candidates who are inferior to her advancing to become sorcerers? Yet she is still stuck at the level of a quasi-sorcerer. It's because we've interfered too much. Don't tell me we don't do anything, don't prepare anything, and let Chave participate in the battle of fate that has a slim chance of survival? Lady, when Miss Chave awakened the bloodline of the Witch of Fate, her fate is no longer under our control. The more you do, the more mistakes you'll make. Miss Chave has already suffered from the backlash of the law of fate, and that fortune teller has obviously become a person favored by fate. If you continue to interfere, I'm afraid Miss Chave will directly become the enemy of fate. At that time, there will really be no chance at all. That damn fortune teller caused Chave to suffer so much. Can't we even fight back?" Chapter 341. Agatha's right. A crisp and cold female voice abruptly cut in, causing the two people in the room to be startled. Following the soft sound of the wooden door, a slender figure wrapped in a long palace dress appeared in front of the two. "Mother, welcome." The two in the room hurriedly bowed and couldn't help but feel inexplicably nervous. This was because it was none other than the chief and leader of the entire Deception Witches clan, Lady Angelina, who had the strength of a grade 4. Angelina was already more than 700 years old, but judging from her appearance alone, she seemed to be a few years younger than her daughter, Lena. When the two stood together, people who didn't know what was going on would mistake Lena for her mother and Angelina for her daughter. However, as a grade 4 witch, with Angelina's arrival, the entire haunted hut suddenly became quiet. Some strange monsters that were kept in bottles or wooden cages were curled up in the corner, shivering, not even daring to breathe loudly. There were many secrets in the wooden hut. So long as they were scanned by her mental power, they would undoubtedly be revealed. In particular, the secret laboratory hidden in the wooden hut's basement attracted Angelina's mental power for a moment. I completely agree with what Agatha said just now. Angelina walked to the bed and looked at Chvi, who was still unconscious. She secretly sighed. Before coming, I had already ordered a stop to the pursuit of the chosen of fate. Mother, Lena couldn't help but take a step forward. Say no more. Angelina interrupted her directly. Now that things have come to this, both you and I have to bear some responsibility. What's wrong is wrong. We must correct it when things have developed to the point of no return. Yes, Mother. Lena lowered her head sadly. She knew her mother's temperament very well. When it came to things that she had decided on, she would never allow outsiders to disobey her. You should also focus on the next few years. You don't have to worry about the clan's affairs. Just focus on assisting Chvi. Be sure to arm her strength before the battle of fate begins. The return of the Destiny Witches is likely to be a harbinger, and the other witch factions that have lost their inheritance are likely to return one after another. So, at this point, Angelina paused for a moment and suddenly stopped talking. This matter was extremely complicated, and it was very likely to involve the entanglement of love and hate between the 13 branches of the ancient witches. Therefore, before receiving the news from the outside world, the more he did, the more mistakes he would make. This was the other main reason why Angelina decided to stop the hunt. Hearing that she was deprived of her power, Rena's face instantly turned pale, but she still nodded obediently. When will she wake up? Angelina asked Agatha this time. Feeling the direct gaze of a grade 4 witch, Agatha instantly sweated profusely. She forced herself to calm down and said, Miss Chave's body did not suffer any injuries, but her spiritual consciousness suffered a strong impact. If she could get rid of the nightmare on her own, then her spiritual origin would only need a period of recuperation to recover. If we forcefully awaken it, I'm afraid, then let her stay here for a while. During this period, you can withdraw any resources you need from the clan. You must not harm Chvi's talent and potential. Do you understand? I understand. I understand. Agatha nodded quickly. Also, manage your laboratory well. If I hear any news about it outside the Forest of Whispers, do you know what the consequences will be? Angelina stopped at the door and said a few words coldly. Agatha seemed to understand what the matriarch was talking about, so she kept nodding her head in agreement. Yes, yes, yes. I'll be careful. After the domineering Angelina left, Rena stared at Agatha suspiciously. What taboo experiment are you doing behind my back? Even Mother couldn't help but beat you up. Nothing. It's really nothing. Agatha's ugly old face smiled flatteringly, trying to play dumb. Humph, you better not cause any serious consequences. Otherwise, even if Mother doesn't punish you, I won't let you go. Rena's next words immediately gave Agatha a headache. All right, Chvi needs to recuperate here. The second floor of this hut will be my temporary residence. Take care of Chvi and don't bother me if there's nothing important. After saying that, she waved her hand and a few apprentice witches immediately rushed in, looking like they were going to thoroughly clean the haunted hut. Agatha's wrinkled face finally couldn't help but twitch. 7 years later, Fed South City, Wizard Tower. 7 years was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. 4 high-ranking wizards. 7 years might only be enough to complete a large-scale witchcraft experiment. But for wizarding apprentices, it was enough for them to walk between heaven and hell. Wizard Meryl held a thick book in her arms and walked out of the classroom. A group of gray-robed apprentices immediately showed a cautious and respectful expression when they saw her. They all moved to the sides of the corridor and bowed slightly. Wizard Meryl had a faint smile on her face. She walked through the crowd and turned to the floating disc. After returning to the 6th floor, she actually saw a familiar figure at the door of her residence. "Am, it's you? When did you come back?" Meryl asked with a hint of surprise. Her tone was also a little intimate. "I just came back. Lady Alice asked me to invite you over." AM was a little reserved. Although he was lucky enough to become a prospective wizard 5 years ago, he was still far from Meryl, who had become a wizard in 1 go 2 years ago. They were all wizarding apprentices. Although there was some difference in strength, they were all wizarding apprentices, so there was not much of a barrier when they interacted. But now that Meryl had successfully become a wizard, the original 5 wizarding apprentices had unnaturally split up. Of the group of 5, Kodar was a veteran prospective wizard. Naturally, he was not willing to be beaten by Meryl and become an inferior apprentice. Therefore, he forcefully tried to advance last year, but the result was, naturally, regrettably a failure. Although it was not life-threatening, the damaged spiritual space was still not completely repaired. As for the remaining 3 advanced wizarding apprentices, AM and Tori had also successfully become prospective wizards. Only Lena was still suffering at the level of an advanced wizard apprentice. 3 years ago, the Cerubo family had distributed another batch of wizarding apprentices. Wizard Grimm had 3 new advanced wizarding apprentices, in which Alice had 5 new wizarding apprentices. As for Meryl, since she had just become a wizard, she still had to focus on stabilizing her spiritual space, so the family did not give her any apprentice tasks. However, she took the initiative to accept teaching tasks in the Wizard Tower, so she had the most widespread good reputation among the wizarding apprentices in the family. In the past 7 years, with the return of the Cerubo family's foreign resources and the return of a few wizarding apprentices, the Wizard Tower in Ferdinand City became lively again. The return of the rank 2 wizard Forgan and another rank 1 wizard, Gaia, brought back a large amount of rare resources from other planes. Under the family's unstinting nurturing, 3 prospective wizards had successfully become wizards in the past 5 years. This also allowed the Cerubo family's foundation, Ferdinand City, to have more than a dozen wizards stationed there. 1 rank 3 wizard, Sanazar, 1 rank 2 wizard, Forgan, and 9 rank 1 wizards. After 7 years, the Cerubo family had finally recovered from the impact of the last planar war. As long as they continued to fight steadily, the family's strength would definitely continue to increase. If the only 2 rank 3 wizards in the family could successfully advance to rank 4, the Cerubo family would have hope of becoming a large wizard family. After all, in the wizarding world, the only top-notch strength that everyone recognized was rank 4. Upon hearing Alice's invitation, Meryl immediately revealed a joyful smile and brought AM to the 7th floor of the Magus Tower. Although she had the ability to stand on her own after advancing to a wizard, she still considered herself a wizard of Grimm's faction because of their friendship and relationship. Among them, she was the closest to Alice. There were 2 reasons for this outcome. Firstly, it was because they were both women. Although Alice's body had been solidified in the state of an 8-year-old girl, she was now a mature woman of 23 years old. At least, that was the case in her heart. Meryl was about the same age as her. One was Grimm's subordinate, and the other was Grimm's disciple. Their similar statuses allowed them to quickly become close friends who could talk about anything. As for the second point, only the 2 of them knew about it. Before Meryl advanced, Alice had used divination to help her solve some problems that had been bothering her for a long time. Most of the expenses for her level-up ceremony were paid by Grimm, so after she successfully leveled up, the poor wizard Meryl naturally came to his side. In Alice's residence, a large winged eagle was tied up tightly and laid flat on the floor. Its half-burnt feathers showed that it had suffered a terrible abuse. "Sister Alice, did you really bring it back?" Meryl couldn't help but cry out in joy when she saw the prey Alice brought back. Chapter 342. The celebratory banquet was held at Alice's residence. Apart from a magi and acolytes from Grimm's faction, there were also many elite acolytes from other magi. Most of them had excellent personal friendships with Kedar, AM, and the others. It had to be said that Grimm's personality was extremely easygoing. Under his leadership, the atmosphere within the entire faction was rather harmonious and natural. The 2 magi he had nurtured were also known as the magi with the least airs of arrogance. As a magus who taught public lessons in the Magus Tower, Meryl had interacted with almost all the acolytes in the family, so she was known as the most amiable, beautiful magus. Alice, on the other hand, did not have the slightest awareness of becoming a magus. She hung out with her acolytes all day long. In these few years, Alice's footsteps had covered the mountains and rivers around the scattered Tower Forest area. Wherever there were monsters and ruins, she would bring a group of acolytes and kill them without saying a word. With the spider puppet beast protecting her, the Inferno Tyrant acting as a fighter, and her all-pervasive divination skills, no matter what kind of prey was targeted by her, they would not be able to escape. Moreover, with divination skills, Alice was also quite good at seeking fortune and avoiding calamity. She could always avoid unknown disasters and traps as if she had the help of the gods. This also made traveling with her the safest and most pleasant thing to do. Every time they went on an adventure, Alice could always use her little platinum hammer to divine whether there were any risks and where the risks were. Therefore, the acolytes who went with her only needed to prepare everything according to her instructions. Dangers that were beyond their ability to withstand would always pass them by, and those that could reach them would always be those that they could handle. Every time they went on an adventure, the danger was not great, and they could always gain something. More importantly, Alice was a little rich lady and did not care about most of the gains for battles. After every successful adventure, she only took a very small number of items that were helpful to her. As for the rest, they naturally became the possessions of the acolytes. Relying on this magical ability and generous methods, Alice very quickly gathered a group of acolyte-level believers and fans. Therefore, every time Alice came to the mission hall in high spirits and waved her hand to recruit team members, all the acolytes in the Wizard Tower would fight for a spot. Therefore, while most wizards were busy collecting resources and accumulating knowledge, Alice was leading a group of acolytes to explore almost all the ruins and danger zones in the scattered Talon region. There were still dangerous and forbidden areas left, but most of them were beyond the level of a normal wizard, so Alice could not get a wizard to help her, so she could only give up. Because of Alice and Meryl's unparalleled rallying power among the apprentices, when Alice held a celebration feast in her residence, all the elite apprentices with a bit of fame in the Wizard Tower came. The banquet officially started at 8 p.m. Unlike ordinary noble banquets, there were no gorgeously dressed maids here, nor was there a band playing cheerful music. Only a huge long table was set up in a corner of the banquet hall, filled with all kinds of fine wine and delicacies. There were also some small plates on the side for the banquet staff to take as they pleased. What was left was the spacious banquet hall. Everyone gathered in groups of 3 to 5, either exchanging information and resources or simply chatting. The whole banquet was relaxed and cheerful. The host of the banquet was, of course, the most famous goblin merchant in Grimm's faction, Cabby. Not only did he sponsor all the wine and food for the banquet, but he also specially brought a large number of the most sought-after acolytes and held a small internal auction in a corner of the hall. In the past few years, Grimm had rarely appeared in public. He stayed in his house all year round. No one knew what he was doing. Following his disappearance, the Goblin Cabbie became more active day by day. Relying on Grimm's influence, the Goblin Cabbie almost monopolized the low-grade material market and the supply of acolyte resources in Fedinin City. Moreover, he could always get his hands on some strange magic machinery and strange alchemy items that were hard to find in the outside world. So his goblin shop grew bigger and bigger. In the area where Fedinin City was located, the Goblin Cabbie's name was getting more and more famous, to the point that even the surrounding regions were starting to hear about him. Of course, the Goblin Cabbie knew his position very well. As a green-skinned goblin, he actually had no status in this human society that was dominated by wizards. The reason why he was able to climb to his current height was because of the terrifying fire demon that stood behind him. Without Grimm's backing, a green-skinned goblin like him will be captured by wizards in a matter of minutes and become the most miserable and insignificant test subject. Therefore, after understanding his position, Kirby used his clever mind to consolidate and manage his small circle of friends. This small circle was built with a few wizard apprentices under Grimm as the core. He did not hesitate to sell the necessary resources to Kodar, Meryl, MU, and the others at extremely low prices, using this method to exchange for their support and protection of his goblin shop. After Meryl successfully advanced to become a sorcerer, she reaped the most generous rewards. While Grimm was busy and Alice was busy, with Wizard Meryl supporting him, Kodar and AMU supporting him, the Goblin Cabbie's business became more and more successful. To put it bluntly, there were now more than 20 wizard apprentices working under Cabbie in the Wizard Tower. Among them, Cabbie could dispatch as many as 7 high-grade apprentices at any time. There were also countless apprentices who maintained a good relationship with him. Cabbie wasn't the little gnome that could be bullied by anyone in the past. If anyone dared to anger the great goblin merchant Cabbie, he could summon more than 10 wizard apprentices to fight for him with a wave of his hand. If this still could not be settled, he could still summon 2 wizards and 7 or 8 elite apprentices. If this still did not work, Cabbie could only resort to his ultimate move and complain to Grimm. And the name of the fire demon was known to everyone in the Ferdinand region. As the banquet progressed, the venue was quickly divided into 3 small circles that represented different levels. Although every small circle didn't have those bad rules and bad habits that kept people thousands of miles away, who should stay in which circle was like an invisible shackle that bound everyone to their own position. The ones who had the highest authority were the 2 wizards, Alice and Meryl, as well as a few elite apprentices in the core circle. They gathered in a corner of the banquet, holding fragrant light red wine in their hands, and raised their glasses to congratulate Alice. Alice, on the other hand, drank it in one gulp with a proud look on her face. This circle included the few core members who were closest to Grimm, and they were also the most important military force in Grimm's faction. Grimm hid in his residence every day and did not take a step out, obsessed with the pursuit of ultimate power. With the resources he had accumulated, he did not care about the distribution of resources and benefits within the Cerubo family, but his apprentices had a care. Therefore, they joined forces and roped in Alice and Meryl as their backers. As a result, they naturally became one of the more powerful factions within the Cerubo family. This circle was so tightly connected, and their combat power was so strong that it left people speechless. The fire demon Grimm, the violent Alice, and the gentle Meryl. These 3 were so tightly tied together that even a grade 2 wizard, Forgan, did not dare to underestimate them. Therefore, with the rise of the tide, Grimm's faction would naturally have a great advantage in the distribution of benefits and resources within the family. The second small circle in the banquet was made up of the elite apprentices of the various wizards. Most of them were quasi-wizards, but there were 1 or 2 high-ranked apprentices who had their own special skills. They were the kind of people who could not be ignored no matter where they went. Although they did not belong to Grimm's faction, they had some way to maintain good relationships with the people in Grimm's faction. Apart from official magi, these people were undoubtedly the most powerful and influential group of people in the Cerubo family. Although they were still apprentices, they all had the potential to become sorcerers, so none of them could be underestimated. There were many cases of enemies disappearing after they accidentally advanced to become magi due to conflicts during the apprenticeship period. That was why apprentices nowadays were extremely tactful and did not want to provoke a quasi-wizard easily. At least on the surface, everyone was good to each other, which made them seem rather united and harmonious. The third circle was made up of the largest group of people in each Magus family, the high-ranked apprentices. Taking the Cerubo family as an example, the number of official magi was only in the double digits. Most of them had to be stationed at various resource points and important bases, so there were not many active magi in Ferdinand City. The ones who were second only to the magi were the quasi-wizards. Although there were more of them, there was still a limit to their numbers. There were only about 20 to 30 quasi-wizards in the Cerubo family, and they were also the group that the family was most willing to nurture. Any one of them who successfully advanced to become a magus would soar to the heavens and become a big shot who did not have to worry about food and water and had plenty of resources. Apart from the magi and quasi-wizards, the ones who supported the ruling framework of every magus family were the high-ranked apprentices. Most of the acolytes sent to the headquarters from resource points and family encampments in various regions were high-level acolytes. Even if they were low-ranked apprentices, most of them had special talents in enchantment, herbology, alchemy, and so on. Chapter 343. Apprentices were the cornerstone of a sorcerer family's long-term, stable development. Only by establishing a well-functioning training system could it be possible to continuously provide qualified cannon fodder for the sorcerer family. Yes, in the history of sorcerer development, where the planar war was the main character, Grade 1 sorcerers were just suitable soldiers. They were the main force in the planar war, and also the cannon fodder for the sorcerer family to expand outwards. Only by relying on the nutrients extracted from the planar war could sorcerers break through the shackles of the sorcerer world resources, step by step nurturing super powerhouses who could step out of the void. As one of the few well-developed large planes in the multiverse, the sorcerer world was second to none in terms of richness and diversity of resources. However, no matter how vast the plane was, it would not be able to support the expansion of the number of sorcerers. No matter how large the sorcerer world was, it could not support the demand of so many sorcerers. The disaster world was such an example. According to the sequence of development, the disaster world was a large plane that rose far earlier than the sorcerer world. However, as the number of powerhouses in the disaster world skyrocketed, the resources of the entire plane were no longer enough to support such a large number of extraordinary creatures. Moreover, the extraordinary creatures living in the disaster world were all unambitious. Apart from occasionally going out to wreak havoc in some small planes and plundering the resources inside, most of the time they were desperately intercepting the disaster world's plane source. This undoubtedly made their individual strength stronger, but for the disaster world that gave birth to them, it was a huge disaster. The extraction of a large amount of the plane source caused the disaster world to gradually become dilapidated, and the living environment became worse and worse. It could no longer breed the basic resources needed to grow and reproduce in the world, such as food, air, water, and other things. Seeing that the world they lived in could no longer bear it, the powerful, extraordinary creatures of the disaster world finally stopped this self-destructive, selfish action. In view of the current situation of a disaster world, it was no longer able to support any more extraordinary creatures. As for those who relied on intercepting the disaster world's plane source to advance to Grade 9, once the disaster world was destroyed, they would also be destroyed because of the connection between the source and the plane. Therefore, 11 of the existing extraordinary creatures who had reached Grade 9 met and discussed, and joined forces to seal the entire world, not allowing any new creatures to advance to Grade 9 by usurping the plane source. Furthermore, they had decreed that the number of Type 9 powerhouses in the disaster realm would be fixed at 11. In order to display their strength and valor, these 11 Class 9 extraordinary life forms called themselves the Lords of Calamity. Each of them was a terrifying powerhouse that could wreak havoc in the multiverse. In order to prevent the disaster world from continuing to decline, the 11 Lords of Calamity came to an agreement. Most of them chose to hide in the depths of the disaster world and hibernate to reduce the burden on the world will. At the same time, only 3 to 5 Lords of Calamity were allowed to remain conscious. These awakened Lords of Calamity were responsible for constantly searching for suitable planes of calamity, plundering resources, population, and plane origin from other planes to make up for the gap in the calamity world. And such an act of harming others to benefit oneself was naturally rejected by the entire multiverse. Thus, as the Lords of Calamity crazily invaded and exploited the material planes, a new powerful race rose in the multiverse, the Titans. This was a terrifying giant that could destroy a small plane with its bare hands. The newborn Titans of their race had the strength of a Grade 4 powerhouse, while the adult Titans had the strength of a Grade 7 powerhouse. As for the powerhouses of their race, each of them had the terrifying strength of a Grade 9 powerhouse. They were powerful creatures born from the will of the multiverse, and specialized in hunting and sniping the Lords of Calamity for a living. In order to stop the Lords of Calamity from wreaking havoc on the Plains of Calamity, the Titans and the Lords of Calamity fought fiercely. Their battles covered almost every part of the multiverse. They moved from one plane to another, and almost every plane they chose as their battlefield became broken fragments floating in the depths of the endless sea of stars. Countless Titans fell under the terrifying attacks of the Lords of Calamity. Their blood floated in the depths of the galaxy. Occasionally, some of it would fall into the material plane and take root there, giving birth to strange creatures that possess some of the Titans' abilities. Powerful creatures such as the ocean giants, the starry sky giants, and the king of Earth that had appeared in the material plane basically all had part of the Titan race's bloodline in their bodies. Thus, in the sorcerer world, the Gaia family sorcerers with the bloodline of the Golden Titans became the strongest bloodline sorcerers. With the Lords of Calamity and the Titans both injured, they retreated to their lairs to recuperate. Thus, the multiverse gave the sorcerer world, the world of gods, and the world of dragons a chance to rise up. Even so, these latecomers could not reach the level of the Lords of Calamity and the Titans. The sorcerer world might be strong enough in the multiverse, but it had only produced 3 grade 9 powerhouses. The world of gods, which had always been fighting with the sorcerer world for dominance, had more than 10 main gods who were comparable to grade 9 powerhouses. It was a pity that they had split into 4 or 5 powerful gods that did not belong to each other, and the hatred between them was deeply rooted. This was why they did not have an overwhelming numerical advantage over the sorcerer world. As for the world of dragons, they only had a pitiful grade 9 dragon god. However, the dragon race had a powerful body and strength that everyone envied. They could easily fight against enemies of a higher rank. Thus, with this single grade 9 dragon god, the dragons were not at a disadvantage against the sorcerer world and the gods. They even had the strength to extend their tentacles into the countless material planes within his personal residence. Seeing this, Grimm could not help but close the book and start to daydream about the boundless starry sky world. As someone who had transmigrated to another world, Grimm could not help but want to look at the world he lived in from a more comprehensive perspective. What kind of world was it? What kind of world did it have? Was his appearance in this world an accident, or was it a predestined variable? If his appearance was a deliberate arrangement, then what was the mission that he was carrying on his back? In the residence next door, Alice was holding a grand banquet. Grimm didn't even need to extend his mental power to know what was happening there through his subtle mental connection. Grimm did not have any objections to Alice's crazy way of hunting and celebrating. In fact, he even sympathized with her. The battle of destiny was finally right in front of her. Even if she thought she was well prepared, the moment Alice stepped into the Tower of Destiny, her life was no longer under her control. The rise of the Destiny Witches was due to the unstoppable power of the plane's laws. At the end of the day, the Destiny Witches were just a carrier and spokesperson of the power of destiny. What it wanted was not the strongest one, nor the smartest one, but the one who was most compatible with it. Who was the one chosen by destiny? No one could answer this question. No matter how much Grimm did for Alice, there was no guarantee that she would be the one to survive in the end. Therefore, participating in the battle of destiny was truly a matter of life and death. Alice was only 23 years old. It was already good enough that she did not go crazy and do something even more outrageous when faced with an uncertain future at such a young age. That was why Alice had brought along the bodyguards that Grimm had prepared for her to hunt all over the place, mingling with the other acolytes. Grimm did not complain at all, and even sympathized with her. If they failed in this battle of destiny, Grimm would lose 10 years of his life and an incalculable amount of resources, while Alice would lose her life. Therefore, Grimm did not intend to interfere with how Alice planned to spend her short 8 years. As long as she was intelligent, as long as she cared about her life, she would not be depressed. The opportunity had been given to her, and now it was up to her to grasp it. However, this matter depended more on destiny. Because of this, Grimm could only choose to stay in the Magus Tower and focus on exploring the deeper secrets of the multiverse. As for increasing his strength, Grim was about to give up hope. Chip, show me the basic stats of my body. Beep. Command accepted. Checking data. Very quickly, Grim's basic stats were projected into his mind. Grim, human, semi-converted, male, grade 1 elemental magus. Body, strength 2, 8, agility 1, 3, vitality 3, 9, spiritual force 7. Status, healthy. 7 years. After spending 7 years in the Magus Tower, his spiritual force had only increased from 6 or 3 to 7. Ever since it reached 7, he could no longer feel any increase in his spiritual force. It was as if his current spiritual force had reached a threshold, and he could no longer advance. After flipping through a large number of books in his family, Grim finally found the reason why it was so difficult to increase his spiritual force. His elemental essence conversion was incomplete. Currently, he had only completed the elemental essence conversion of his body, but the process of elemental essence conversion of his spiritual force had been slow. The reason why he could not increase his spiritual force was the lag in elemental essence conversion. However, these 7 years had allowed him to slowly adapt to the Balrog's heart that was sealed in his chest. The current him could already unleash the full might of the Balrog's heart. As long as he did not break the seal for more than half an hour, Grim would not have to worry about the aura of the abyss infecting his body. Chapter 344. Time was almost up. Regardless of whether Alice was afraid or excited, the day of the Tower of Destiny's opening was approaching. Considering that there was no direct airship from the scattered forest of towers to the north, the only way to pass through the tens of thousands of miles of Black Forest was to follow a large caravan that traveled between the two places all year round. These caravans were usually inextricably linked to a certain faction of the Northern Witches, so they would send people to protect them, so their safety was guaranteed. However, considering that it would take up to 2 months to pass through the Black Forest, Grim decided to set off in advance when there was still half a year left before the Battle of Destiny. On an ordinary morning, Grim set off with Alice. There were only 3 people in the family who knew where they were going. The journey to Moda's city was very peaceful. They boarded an airship and headed north. It only took them 9 days to reach the northernmost public city of the scattered forest of towers, Ibis City. As soon as they got off the airship, Grim was attracted by the bustling city in front of him. Compared to other places, this place was a little dirty and messy, but it was full of vitality. There were long caravans of merchants driving huge beasts of burden through the city, strong barbarians draped in animal skins and carrying giant axes, half-werewolves with wolf heads, and many mercenaries carrying bows and swords on their backs, calling out to their friends. To be honest, Grim had never seen so many different races in one place. They seemed to belong to the tough and robust fighting species, and they also had brains and intelligence that were not much different from that of humans. Since they were also part of the Black Forest, almost every caravan that needed to pass through the Black Forest would hire a large number of them as guards. Let's go and find a place to settle down first. Then we'll think about which caravan to join. At this place, Grim was no longer in charge, but Alice. Although she was young, she had traveled through this part of the Black Forest twice, so she was more familiar with the roads and rules here than Grim. Under her lead, the two of them walked out of the airship docking area, passed through a bustling market, and finally entered Ibis City. Compared to the other areas in the scattered tower forest, Ibis City was close to the northern lands, so the number of witches here far exceeded the number of wizards sent by the association. Therefore, other than the wizard tower that towered into the clouds in the city center, almost all the other buildings in the city were built with thick logs. From the outside, it gave off a rough and bold feeling unique to the Northlanders. Alice didn't bring Grim to visit the wizard tower here. Although this was something most traveling wizards would do, it could easily attract the attention of the witches. Especially at this critical moment, Any unfamiliar faces that wanted to enter or leave the northern lands would attract the special attention of those with ulterior motives. Originally, Grimm thought that Alice would bring him to the Moya family's base here. Who would have thought that Alice would bring him to a trading company called Dark Knight Rose after going around in circles? The Dark Knight Rose was a subsidiary force of the Dark Witches. After skillfully haggling with the manager of the trading firm, Alice successfully reserved 2 spots in the team for 200 magical crystals per person. The identities she reported were that they were 2 ordinary magi who were traveling to the north in search of special resources. Since the goods of the caravan had not arrived yet, the departure date was set to 3 days later. Therefore, the 2 of them could only find an inn near the trading firm to stay. After the 2 of them left, the manager hesitated for a moment and gestured for one of his subordinates to take care of the shop while he hurried to the backyard. There, a large golden tent was set up on the grass in the backyard. Only apprentice witches wearing short apprentice robes could enter and exit the tent. After a series of announcements, the manager of the trading firm finally met the real person in charge of escorting the caravan, the Grade 2 Dark Witch Kola, inside the golden tent. The space inside the tent was not small, and the decorations inside were extremely luxurious. Under the feet of the tent was a soft carpet with complex patterns, and the surroundings were filled with embroidered golden curtains. Each of the curtains was exceptionally exquisite. Many strange creatures were embroidered on them, and most of them were special monsters that only existed in the northern lands. A graceful and languid figure of a woman was leaning against a small wooden table behind the translucent curtains, quietly flipping through a book. "Oh, you mean to say that our caravan has 2 unfamiliar magi?" "Yes, my lord. This is the 3rd batch of magi that came with the caravan. According to your instructions, I sent them away and immediately came to report." "Who are they?" "They're a man and a woman. They said they're here in the northern lands in search of resources and nothing else. There's even a woman." Behind the curtains, which Kola laughed softly. "Recently, there have been many more female magi heading to the northern lands than before." "My lord, you mean they're also, who cares if they are or not? Since they found our caravan, they're our guests. We just need to send them safely to their destination. We don't have to care about anything else." "But if they're really here for that, won't they bring trouble to the caravan?" The manager could not help but hesitate. If it were a few years ago, it would indeed be a little troublesome. Kola smiled softly and said, "But because the deception witches went too far, several witch leaders joined forces to question them at the witch council. They forced their leader, Angelina, to swear that she would never kill any of the candidates who participate in the War of Destiny again. So, the trouble you're talking about no longer exists." "I understand, my lord. I know what to do. All right, you may leave now. Remember to inform them to leave on time in 3 days. If we miss them, we'll have to find another team." "Yes, yes, yes." The manager of the trading firm prostrated himself on the ground and respectfully bowed to the witch in the tent before slowly retreating. In the entire northern lands, witches had an extremely high reputation. Not only did they possess great power, but they were also the owners, protectors, and pioneers of the entire northern lands. It could be said that the entire northern lands were fought over by this group of witches and their many followers from wild monsters and jungle creatures, inch by inch. Therefore, in the face of any northern witch, the people of the northern lands would feel love and respect from the bottom of their hearts. From this point of view, the relationship between the people of the northern lands and the witches was the closest and the most harmonious among all the wizard factions. Meanwhile, Grimm and Alice had already settled down in the inn. In the room, Alice was acting as Grimm's temporary teacher, explaining everything about the northern witches to him. Of course, before coming here, Grimm had a simple understanding of the origin and ruling structure of the northern witches through various channels and books. However, it was like scratching an itch through one's boots. He could only get a vague impression of the northern witches on the surface, which was far less thorough and profound than the explanation of the real witch Alice. There was no need to elaborate on the complicated history of the northern witches. Grimm could obtain these things through books. So, Alice focused on the relationship between the major witch factions and the characteristics of the factions. Yes, on the surface, the Northern Witches were a large witch faction that was extremely united. But if one really studied them thoroughly, one would find that the internal relationship between the Northern Witches was so complicated that it was suffocating. If they were really as united as they looked, then why were there only 7 out of the 13 witch branches now? Although the ups and downs of each witch faction had their own specific fate, there were 6 witch branches that were so weak that even their inheritance was broken. No matter what, this situation could not be explained away with fate. The 7 existing witch factions were deception, ashen, pain, death, winter, darkness, and hypocrisy. Among them, the deception, which was good at transformation and lies, and was currently Alice's main enemy. The Pale, which had a companion spirit that was closely related to her life, which could be immune to most physical damage and had the ability to cast spells. Therefore, provoking the Pale, which was equivalent to provoking a powerful witch and a powerful spirit at the same time. 2 against 1 was what they were best at. The Witch of Pain was good at curses and was also a group of people that produced the most cursementers. The Witch of Death was good at poisons and plagues, and she also had special skills in concocting the undead. The Winter, which was good at the power of ice and snow. Because of the cold and harsh environment of the Northern Witches, they were also the most capable of fighting among the 7 witch factions. The ability of the Dark Witches was more strange. They could create a special psionic pool and then preserve their soul brand in it. In this way, they became the most fearless group of people in battle. Even if they died gloriously in battle, they could be resurrected in the psionic pool within 10 days or half a month. As for the Hypocrisy Witches, their talent was illusion. The Hypocrisy Witches were a very mysterious group, even among the witches, and few people had seen their true faces. As for the witch who ambushed Alice outside Fedinin City last time, she was actually a shape-shifted deceit witch. The Deception Witch's transformation technique did not seem to be as simple as a disguise. Once the transformation was successful, she could also have some of the special abilities of the transformed target. This was actually the most powerful aspect of the Deception Witch. The reason why Alice chose the caravan led by the Dark Witches this time, instead of the Moya family under the Pale Witch faction, was to avoid suspicion. The performance of the family last time also hurt Alice's heart. Chapter 345. 3 days later, the rendezvous point was in front of the Rose of the Dark Knight. When Grim and Alice arrived, there were already a lot of people gathered in front of the door. There were also a few dozen carts parked around. A team of fully armed guards was scattered around the carts. Judging from the race composition, they were mostly powerful warriors of different races. Although Grim had the intention to investigate the secrets of these humanoid races, his attention was mostly attracted by a few figures wrapped in thick robes. In fact, in order to avoid trouble, Grim and Alice were also wearing thick traveling cloaks with their hoods pulled up. Not a single inch of their skin was exposed. However, Alice's childlike body was not something that could be covered by a cloak. Apart from the 2 of them, there were also 4 passengers who wanted to hitch a ride. The 4 of them were divided into 3 groups. 2 of the women were traveling alone, while the other man and woman were in a group like Grim and Alice. Judging from the spirit waves that leaked out, one of the women was a witch and the other an apprentice, while the other man and woman were wizards. So, did you sense anything? Grim looked at the other travelers through the shadow of his hood and communicated with Alice using his spirit power. Unfortunately, all 3 of them are. Alice couldn't help but roll her eyes. There were at least 7 or 8 months before the Tower of Destiny opened. What were these guys doing here so early? She actually encountered so many competitors just by riding a caravan, which made her feel rather speechless. As candidates for the Witches of Destiny, they would more or less have a trace of the aura of Destiny's favor. Outsiders might not be able to sense it, but when they met each other, they could easily figure out who they were. There were 4 candidates in 1 caravan, 3 wizards and 1 apprentice. Involuntarily, a few of the sorcerer rank candidates secretly looked at the female acolyte, and their gazes could not help but contain a trace of disdain and contempt. As a candidate for the Witch of Destiny, she must have awakened some kind of powerful talent. Even under these circumstances, she still couldn't become a wizard. Such a fellow was destined to be eliminated. He probably wouldn't even have the chance to participate in the battle for destiny. Everyone present understood that the law of destiny had never been a generous person, since it had distributed such generous conditions to all parts of the sorcerer continent. Then there would be a day when it would be taken back. Just like raising a poisonous insect, he would give every awakened who met the requirements a shot in the arm, allowing them to grow quickly and healthily. When the time was right, he would open the Tower of Fate and gather them inside. Then, with fate as the furnace and them as the fuel, he would reignite the legacy of the Destiny Witches. In this way, when new Destiny Witches were born, they could use their flesh and souls as nourishment to quickly overcome the period of weakness and become independent witch leaders. Therefore, the few of them were destined to fight to the death. It was impossible for them to coexist peacefully and become friends. While Grim and Alice were silently scrutinizing the others, they were also secretly peeking at them. He was a powerful fire elemental sorcerer. This could be seen from the surging and agitated fire particles around his body. As for the other, the eyes of the two witch candidates showed a doubtful expression. First of all, she must have advanced to become a sorcerer. This could be confirmed by the energy overflowing from her body. However, why were her mental fluctuations so strange? One moment she was acting like a sorcerer, and the next moment she was acting like a normal person. Her mental fluctuations fluctuated endlessly, making it hard to understand. Quietly, the two witches began to secretly hold the crystal ball in their sleeves, as if they wanted to spy on Alice. In the next second, a slight rune explosion came from their bodies, and thick black smoke came out of their sleeves. Two idiots! Alice sneered disdainfully, one hand grabbing Grim's sleeve, the other gently playing with a silver badge. Just now, she had relied on this silver badge to stop those two of her kind from spying on her. The abnormality of the two witches naturally attracted the attention of the people around them. However, after glancing at the few fellows who were staring at them, the guards responsible for guarding the caravan shrugged and moved a few steps away. Obviously, they did not want to get involved in the fight between the witches. From beginning to end, the fight between Alice and the other two witches did not involve the female apprentice. She had been regarded as a harmless creature and was directly ignored. The female apprentice bit her lower lip, feeling the increasingly tense atmosphere in front of her and behind her, and her body began to tremble slightly. Although she knew that she had no chance of winning, the desire to live made her grit her teeth and embark on the journey. As long as she participated, there would be hope. With this simple thought in mind, she did not choose to withdraw, even though she was extremely afraid. The turbulence between the witches had obviously affected the whole team, and some of the ordinary people in the team could not help but show a look of fear on their faces. However, at this moment, a fierce and terrifying mental fluctuation suddenly covered the whole area, forcibly suppressing all the restlessness and uneasiness. Everyone's heart skipped a beat, and they could not help but look at a group of women who had just walked out of the caravan. All of them were women in black robes, and there were 11 of them. Some were young, some were old, some were beautiful, and some were ugly. The woman in the lead even had a dazzling glow on her body. Grim and the others could not help but look away to relieve the stinging pain in their eyes. However, the strange thing was that the ordinary people in the caravan did not seem to feel anything, and they were not affected at all. Since you have chosen us, the Dark Knight Rose, you better follow the rules. We will be responsible for escorting you safely to your destination. The woman stopped and said coldly, "If anyone tries to play any tricks on the way," Grim and the others' hearts skipped a beat, and they all bowed to show respect. This was the courtesy that low-grade witches had to show to high-grade witches. Otherwise, high-grade witches had the right to punish those who were rude. After a slight punishment, the Grade 2, which silently boarded a luxuriously decorated carriage, while the rest of the black-robed women boarded different carriages one after another. 1 Grade 2, 3 Grade 1, 7 apprentice witches. Although Grimm's vision was affected, with the help of the AI chip, he quickly figured out the number of witches in the caravan. With such numbers and strength, they could be compared to some of the smaller clans in the scattered Pagoda Forest region. However, here, there were only the basic equipment of a caravan escort. Since each of them had paid 200 magic crystals, the caravan had provided each wizard with an exquisite carriage. However, for safety's sake, Alice and Grimm still rode in the same carriage. Before boarding the carriage, Grimm noticed that the male and female magus had boarded the same carriage. As soon as they sat in the carriage, Alice impatiently whispered, "Are we going to do anything on the way?" Grimm snapped, "Do you dare to make a move? There's a grade 2 dark witch in the caravan. Besides, if you make the first move, you'll definitely attract the backlash of fate." Alice took out a large apple from somewhere and munched on it. "As long as we want to make a move, there's always a way. Besides, I can see that they're all ready to make a move. Won't it be easy to lure them in? It's best not to make a move if we can." Grimm muttered to himself, "I feel that if they become stronger, it'll be more beneficial to you." Alice tilted her head as she pondered, munching on the apple in her hand even more cheerfully. At the same time, in the carriage of the two magi, a hidden conversation was also going on. "Brother, are we going to make a move on the way?" The female magus pulled down her hood, revealing long blonde hair and a beautiful face. "We'll see." The other magus also pulled down his hood, revealing a pair of dark eyes that had no white in them, giving him a strange and demonic look. The two traveling together are a bit tricky. The little fellow who looks like a child doesn't seem to have much combat power, but her companion is not easy to deal with. As for the one who's alone, we can consider him as a target. The female magus lowered her head and thought for a moment, then looked up and said, "Don't be in a hurry to make a move. Find a chance to test them on the way. You go test the female magus, I'll go talk to the male magus." The male magus sighed silently and finally nodded in agreement. Just as everyone was thinking about it, the long caravan of horses and carriages finally started moving. Of course, the group of mercenaries was the first to clear the way, while the guards of the Dark Knight Rose Chamber of Commerce followed closely on both sides of the caravan. As for the dozens of carriages with magi and apprentices, they were mixed in with the caravan, moving slowly. The caravan's carriages formed a long line, slowly and orderly passing through the city gate. As the caravan moved along the dirt road into the dark forest in the distance, two women were standing in a bunker above the city gate, silently watching the caravan. "Have you counted them?" one of the women asked coldly. "Yes, my lord." The other woman bowed and said, "There are a total of 6 outsiders, and 4 of them are female. Have you used the array to check?" "I've already tested them. All 4 of them reacted to the array glyphs. 2 of them are magi, and 1 is an apprentice." "What about the other one?" "The array's reaction is a bit strange, as if there's some special magus on her that's interfering with our detection." That's normal. Who cares if she can interfere, as long as there's a reaction. Remember to inform the sisters on the other side and report their situation. The earlier we find out, the higher Miss Shuefu's chance of winning will be." "Yes, I understand. I'll contact them now." After the subordinate left, the remaining woman looked at the caravan from afar and could not help but snort coldly. Another group of people coming to die. Do you really think you have a chance in the battle of destiny? A bunch of idiots." Chapter 346. The long caravan shuffled along in the dark forest. The trees on both sides of the road were tall and straight, each of them at least 30 to 40 meters tall and wide enough for 4 people to wrap their arms around. Adding on to the lush foliage of the forest, the huge canopy extended all the way to the top of the road, leaving only a thin white line overhead. Even though it was daytime, the road in the forest was so dark that they needed to light torches to see their surroundings clearly. It was as if the caravan had passed through a dark and silent corridor. Apart from the sound of the wheels and the rumbling of the pack beasts, there were no other sounds. Silence. It was extremely quiet. He could not hear the chirping of birds in the ordinary forest, nor could he see the panting hares, coyotes, and other jungle creatures. The moment they stepped into the dark forest, Grim could clearly feel weak magic energy slowly flowing through the forest. The activity of the elemental particles was also 1 or 2 times higher than outside the forest. Chip, collect the environmental data of the dark forest. Grim thought for a moment and couldn't help but order the AI chip. Beep. Mission established. Collecting environmental data. Strictly speaking, the dark forest occupied 60% of the Magus continent's area, while the scattered forest of towers and the 3 major Magus organizations only occupied 40% of the total area of the Magus continent. This meant that there was still a lot of undeveloped land in the Magus continent, and the only things stopping humans from advancing were the endless dark forest and the vast grasslands. With the massive size of the sorcerer world and its almost perfect environment with high magic power, even if only 1,000th of the creatures in the dark forest and wild prairie were infected and turned into magical creatures, the terrifying number would be enough to make ordinary sorcerers flinch. Hence, if Magi wanted to expand the boundaries of their territories, they had to constantly extend their tentacles into the dark forest, cutting down trees, leveling roads, establishing settlements, erecting Magus towers for protection. This kind of colonization process was never smooth sailing. Every step that humans took towards the dark forest would attract powerful forest creatures, terrifying magical beasts, mutated beasts, and corrupted creatures to retaliate. If it was only a sporadic invasion by magical beasts, it was still manageable. At most, it would only cause a small loss of people, buildings, and resources. However, if a large number of magical creatures were to counterattack, or if a powerful magical creature drove a beast tide, then the newly established settlement might fall. In the history of the Sorcerer Continent's colonization, there had been countless large-scale attacks by dark forest monsters. Every time it happened, it meant that tens of thousands of civilians who had just moved into the settlement became the sacrificial pawns of the conflict between the two sides. In the entire newly colonized area, perhaps only the Sorcerer Tower could barely survive. Everything else would be razed to the ground. That was why every step forward in the humans' living space would require such a complex pulling force multiple times in order to exhaust the patience and numbers of the forest monsters, forcing them to move their territory deeper into the forest. Therefore, in a huge territory that occupied an area of hundreds of miles, from the beginning of colonization to the stable settlement of ordinary people, it would usually take many iterations and dozens of years before it was possible. In a process, tens of thousands of people and double-digit sorcerer lives were common occurrences. That was why every sorcerer who led his followers and slaves to fight for a place to live in the dark forest was a true powerhouse that would be forever remembered by the younger generation. To ordinary people, the dark forest represented mystery, evil, power, and even death. But to sorcerers, it was the biggest treasure trove of resources. There were magic plants growing everywhere, a wide variety of forest creatures, metal mines with abundant resources, and mysterious and powerful magical creatures. Many rare resources that were extinct in the sorcerer world could be found in the depths of the dark forest. Therefore, apart from conquering plains, small groups of sorcerers would go deep into the dark forest to explore ancient ruins and hunt for magical creatures. This was the fastest and most convenient way for them to gather resources. The prerequisites for conquering plains were too harsh, and not all sorcerers could meet them. Hence, exploring the dark forest became the best choice for them to go out to train and gather resources. Grim lifted the curtains of the carriage and looked at the dark forest in the distance. Even with his eyesight without using spells, it was difficult for him to see far. After all, the magical energy here was too active, and it was a huge interference to sorcerers' spiritual senses. Grim lifted the curtains a little higher, and on a tall tree not far away from the carriages, he saw an owl covered in black feathers. The owl was staring at the movements around the forest with its huge eyes, and occasionally made strange sounds at the carriages. That's the owl that the apprentice witches keep. Alice moved closer to Grim and looked at them with a bored expression on her face. They're just some harmless little animals that can be their eyes and ears. Why don't they choose the more powerful, small magical creatures? Grim asked, puzzled. Tisk. Alice could not help but roll her eyes. Do you think everyone is like you, never worrying about magic crystals? They're very poor, and they can't even afford to keep those magical creatures. What's the benefit of keeping them? They can be used as eyes and ears, and can be considered a good flying sentinel. Also, the owls that have cast spells have a weak innate ability to see through invisibility, so they're the best guards. Of course, the most important thing is that keeping them doesn't put too much pressure on the apprentice witch's spiritual power. What kind of pets do the witches have? The ones they use the most are black cats, snakes, red bats, and crows. The black cat can give the host stealth and agility bonuses. The flower snake has infrared detection. The red bat can add light body spell and sound wave positioning. And the crow has night vision. In short, witches like to turn themselves into these messy things. What about you? How come I've never seen your pet before? Oomph. Alice snorted. I've always wanted to catch a hellhound, but I've never succeeded. Hellhound? Hearing this name, Grim's mind automatically thought of a strange abyssal creature that looked like a porcupine, with a body covered in black and red hard skin. This kind of abyssal creature, which could be described as extremely ugly in all aspects, was actually Alice's first choice for a magical pet. This made Grim speechless. Why? Grim could not help but ask. There was once a witch who caught a hellhound as her magic pet, and from then on, she obtained the ability Spell Seal. Also, a hellhound can increase the host's spiritual power, so it's simply the best magic pet. Alice's eyes immediately lit up as she spoke frankly with assurance. But don't you think hellhounds are ugly and ugly? And as far as I know, they all stink, and their bodies are filled with the unique stench of the abyssal creatures in the underworld. Is it really that stinky? Alice's expression changed, and she carefully asked Grim. When she got an affirmative answer, she could not help but hold her small face and frown. Then I'll skin it and smear it with perfume. That should be enough to cover its stench, right? Grim took a deep breath and could not help but worry about Alice's future magic pet. The caravan slowly moved forward in the Black Forest. When they were more than 30 miles away from Ibis City, they could already see the shadows of small animals in the dark forest along the way. However, with the foreign mercenaries driving them away, the forest beasts did not dare to approach the caravan. They only dared to roar a few times from afar, and then quietly sneak back into the depths of the forest. Although this road was not crowded with people, there were more than a dozen caravans shuttling back and forth, and almost all the dangerous monsters in the vicinity had been driven away. If the remaining ordinary beasts dared to approach the caravan, they would instead become food for the mercenaries. Along the way, the scouts sent out by the apprentice witches were simply the busiest group of people. They spread their wings and flew in the dense forest that was difficult for humans to pass through, avoiding the dangerous beasts and birds, and looking everywhere for the traces of rare plants. Once they found something, 2 or 3 apprentice witches would rush into the depths of the forest with a dozen mercenaries, and use the shortest time possible to pick up the rare plants they found. Without a doubt, this would bring them a considerable amount of income. Of course, there were times when there were fierce monsters near the rare plants, and this was the time when the witches in the caravan would go out and find them. Harvests like this along the way were not included in the caravan's account, but belonged to the witches' private trophies. After such a trip, the private harvest of each witch in the caravan would far exceed the rewards given by the caravan. This was why these women were so interested in this treasure hunting game. However, it was impossible for the caravan to stop just to wait for them to search for treasures, so they could only use their magic pets to search a small area within 10 to 20 miles on both sides of the forest road. Even if they found something further away, they would not have enough time to harvest it. And in such an area, after years of repeated searching, almost all the valuable resources had been harvested. Therefore, the witches in the caravan simply gave up on this mentally exhausting game and handed it over to the apprentice witches who came out to gain experience. For these poor apprentices who did not have the qualifications to enjoy the family's offerings, even if it was just some mosquito meat that the witches did not like, it was enough to fill their stomachs. Therefore, they became more and more happy. Thus, in this seemingly slow but actually extremely fast movement, the caravan arrived at the first campsite of their long journey. Chapter 347. The campsite was a clearing in the forest that was off the path. From the traces on the ground, it could be seen that there were caravans that stopped here all year round, so the simple wooden huts and the fire pit for cooking were already made. Unfortunately, due to the lack of permanent staff, the facilities here were often destroyed and attacked by wild beasts in the forest. Since it was only a temporary break, the caravan could not stay here for too long. From the time they set up camp to the time they prepared lunch and left, it would take them at most an hour. The reason they did this was to take care of the ordinary people who made up the majority of the caravan. Taking advantage of the short break during lunch, the apprentice witches could also take the opportunity to explore some further areas. In the depths of the Black Forest, if they were lucky, they could occasionally find some wild resource points. These are usually places where magic energy gathered naturally, so there were also some wizard resources growing there. After a long period of exploration, the witches of any family could find such a wild resource point and find a way to hide it. In this way, as long as they had a certain amount of time, they would be able to steadily come here to harvest. For the witches, this kind of harvest was not a small amount of resources. Therefore, while the ordinary drivers were busy preparing lunch, the witches and apprentices rode their brooms in 2s and 3s and entered the depths of the Black Forest. Grim and the others were not familiar with the terrain here, so once they went too deep into the Black Forest, it was easy for them to get lost. If they could not return in time after an hour, the caravan would not stop to wait for them. Therefore, passing wizards like Grim could only sigh at the rich resources in the Black Forest, but they could not search for treasures like the witches. However, with their strength, it was not a problem for them to move around within 3 to 5 miles of the campsite. That was what Grim did. In the dense and dark forest, wild vines and shrubs were everywhere. In addition to the twisted roots that drilled out of the ground, the entire clearing was covered with grass, moss, dead branches, rotten leaves, and all kinds of strange flowers that could not be named. All of these filled the clearing so tightly that it would be difficult for ordinary people to even pass through. Grim slowly moved forward, his eyes flashing blue as he carefully scanned the surrounding plants. Most of the time, the chaotic growth of the shrubs only had a very narrow space for people to walk through, and the branches and thorns that stretched out could easily cut through the soft and light robes. Therefore, in such an area, it was best to wear a thick and dense traveler's cloak to avoid too much embarrassment. Under Grimm's elemental vision, the darkness of the dark forest around them gradually faded away, revealing some other colors one after another. A large clump of bushes blocked the way, and the space was so narrow that only one person could pass through. Grimm's blue eyes glanced over, and he smiled faintly. When he took another step forward, a faint red barrier appeared beside him. The area covered by the barrier was not large, only 2 or 3 steps away, but its power was not small. All the plants that touched the fire barrier were instantly incinerated into ashes. As Grimm kept moving forward, a path of ashes suddenly appeared in the dense thicket of plants. Amidst the charred ashes, blood-red vines twisted and curled up crazily, lashing at the ground and everything around it with force. Some of the blood vines knew the situation and retreated in time. They curled up in the bushes around them and hid themselves again. Some of the blood vines struggled for a while and finally couldn't withstand the burning of the flame barrier. In the end, they turned into ashes like the surrounding plants. Grimm's arrival seemed to have sounded the death knell of the enchanted plants. For a moment, strange rustling sounds came from the bushes in front of him. Countless blood-sucking vines, man-eating flowers, and poisonous roses that were hiding in the bushes swayed their short limbs and staggered away from Grimm's path. As if someone was shouting, "Open sesame," The bushes in front of them squeaked and opened up a path for Grim to pass through unimpeded. Countless withered vines that hung down from the top of the tall trees began to wriggle like snakes, slowly retracting their tentacles. This place was as calm as usual, seemingly safe and peaceful, just like a beautiful and warm little forest behind a house, where people could explore after eating and drinking their fill. However, when they were forced to remove their disguises by Grim, it instantly turned into a magical forest where demons danced wildly. Of course, the scene before him was actually the real dark forest. The peace and tranquility just now was just an illusion that the enchanted plants presented to their prey after hiding their fangs and tentacles. Grim grabbed a blood-red vine that was quickly retracting. In the middle of its long vine, there was an eye-catching tumor-like protrusion that was the size of a fist. As if sensing Grim's evil intentions, the blood-red vine in his hand wriggled and trembled violently. However, as the bright red fire element quickly gathered, the bright flames instantly ignited the entire vine. The elemental flames came and went quickly. When the flames were extinguished, the blood-red vine that was wriggling like a snake had already been incinerated into ashes. Only a light red crystal the size of a thumb was left in Grim's palm. A blood crystal. It was a pretty good crystal that could be used to replenish one's vitality. He remembered that in the magic swamp, as an acolyte, he had to harvest the blood sacs that grew from the vampiric vines regularly. However, those blood sacs were much weaker than the blood crystal in front of him. In a magic swamp, the vampiric vines could not find much fresh blood to feed on, so the quality of the blood sacs they produced was also very poor. How could it be compared to the blood crystal in his hand? If Grim was still an acolyte, this blood crystal could at least increase his vitality by 0, 8, 1, or even 1. But now, Grim threw the blood crystal into his mouth and bit it lightly. A sweet mucus with a rich fragrance flowed through his esophagus and into his stomach, making him feel warm and comfortable. According to the Chip's prompt, his vitality was slowly expanding and was about to reach a state of overflowing. That was all. A blood crystal that could increase an acolyte's vitality by 1 point could only replenish his vitality. Apart from that, it had almost no other effects. After all, after becoming a magus, their vitality had already been tempered. Most of the resources and materials available to acolytes were no longer useful to them. Although it could not increase their vitality, eating it as a type of snack was quite beneficial to the body. After thinking this through, Grim put his hands behind his back and strolled casually in the dark forest. With the help of his powerful elemental vision, anything in the dark forest that had an unusual color would attract his attention. The blood crystal in the vampiric vine's body was light red. The roots and thorny tentacles of the man-eating flowers were light blue. The leaves of the poisonous roses were purple. The sap of the demonic herbs was milky white. This was the first time Grim had seen such a rich supply of magical creatures, and he became a little flustered. One moment, he followed the long tentacles of the vampiric vines to find their main body hidden in the tall, ancient trees. The next moment, he chased after the man-eating flowers that were twisting their waists as they tried to escape. The next moment, he ignored the strange cries of the demonic herbs and uprooted them from the bushes. Evil people would be tortured by evil people. The magical plants had always been hidden hunters, but today they finally met a real enemy. They did not have the nimble bodies of the magical beasts, so when faced with Grim, they could only hide and hide. Unfortunately, their short and clumsy limbs made escaping a joke. As for hiding, what kind of disguise could hide from Grim's elemental vision? As a result, in less than an hour, the vast area with an abundance of magical plants that was half a mile in depth had been ravaged by Grim's barbaric harvesting. It was on the verge of extinction. Grim straightened his back and estimated the time. He looked at the nearby forest with regret. There, in the pitch-black darkness, every flickering speck of fluorescent light was a target worthy of investigation. Unfortunately, he did not have enough time. When Grim returned to the camp, The witches and acolytes who had gone out had already returned. The ordinary odd-job driver had also finished eating and drinking. After a simple rest, the caravan continued on its journey. In the creaking carriage, Grim opened the bag in his hands and showed Alice the fruits of his hard work. However, there was no praise or surprise as he had expected. Instead, he was greeted with questions and rolled eyes. What? How'd you do it? Haven't you learned anything about herbology? Why are there only blood crystals and not the main body of the vampiric vines? Don't you know that the main body of the vampiric vines is more precious than the blood crystals? What is this? Could it be the roots of a man-eating flower? Don't tell me you met a man-eating flower in human form. There are many magi who are willing to pay 40 magic crystals for these magical plants. You didn't burn them, did you? Also, why are the demonic emperor herbs incomplete? When you plucked the demonic emperor herbs, didn't you know to leave their roots intact? This kind of incomplete demon emperor grass will greatly reduce their value. Listening to Alice's demonic nagging, the corners of Grim's mouth twitched. This was the first time he lamented his ignorance of herbology. Damn it, wasn't it just plucking some magic materials? How did it become so troublesome? Chapter 348. A Failed Adventure in the Forest. This was the definition that Alice had given Grim after looking through his spoils of war. This undoubtedly made Grim feel a little embarrassed. Ever since he had the help of the AI chip, his life had been turned upside down. With the support of a vast amount of knowledge, it was rare for him to experience such a setback. However, this had a lot to do with the fact that he was more practical in the past. Grim had always been eager to add knowledge that could help him and strengthen himself into the AI chip. However, knowledge that was more obscure like herbology and magical botany would undoubtedly slow him down. Just as Grim was frowning in thought, Alice took out a wrinkled book from her waist pouch and tossed it over. Take a closer look at this book. Grim caught it and took a look. The Encyclopedia of Elementary Magical Plants. All right, he was indeed a novice when it came to herbology. All he could do was make up for what he had missed in the past. With boundless emotions, Grim could only hold the book in his hands and flip through it page by page. In fact, with the AI chip's current scanning and storage abilities, a book of over 100 pages like this would only take 3 to 5 minutes. However, in front of Alice, in order to not expose the existence of the AI chip, Grim could only collect the information as slowly as possible. The caravan successfully reached the second campsite before the sky turned dark. The Black Forest at night was even more sinister than during the day. Most of the magical beasts had a greater range of activity and were more aggressive than during the day, so traveling at night was a big taboo. With the help of many guards and mercenaries, the caravan left the green and white dirt road and turned into an even narrower path. After many twists and turns, they unexpectedly arrived near a small green lake. The lake was not big, but the water was clear and translucent. The mirror-like surface of the lake clearly reflected the blue sky, white clouds, and tall trees in the surroundings. People who had just arrived would not be able to tell which was real and which was just a reflection. The sky gradually darkened. The people in the caravan drove the wagons and carriages to the open space by the lake and arranged them in a certain order. They lit a bonfire, fetched some clean water, and began to boil the soup. A faint aroma of fish soup spread through the forest. Grim and Alice got out of the carriage and walked slowly by the lake, waiting for their supper. Grim also noticed that after the tier 2 dark which alighted from the carriage, she dropped a green seed in the middle of the campsite. After that, a few apprentice witches set up a huge, beautiful tent. Seeing Grim's doubtful gaze, Alice explained in a low voice, "It's a spell formation seed." It was a variant of a spell formation. Seal the spell formation in a special plant seed first, and bury the seed underground when needed. As the plant grows, the spell formation will be able to extend in nearby areas. Tomorrow, when I need to leave, I'll put the spell formation away. Grim frowned when he heard this. Alice's description was simple, but after he analyzed it, everything became not so simple. There was a limit to a magus' abilities. Regardless of spell casting speed or strength, they could not be compared to a mature and stable spell formation. Back in the Wizard's Pagoda of the Knight's Planar War, even though he had only controlled a simplified version of the attack spell formation, Grimm had already experienced the power of a spell formation. If his future opponents had a similar temporary spell formation, would he still have a chance to defeat them? How many magic crystals does it cost to buy a temporary spell formation like this? What types are there? Are there any limitations to its functions? Where can I buy it? Hearing Grimm's series of questions, Alice felt a headache coming on and could only hurriedly interrupt him. I've only seen a few high-level magi in the clan use these things, but I don't know the specific functions and effects. Idiot! Grimm glared at her. Just because you can't get it doesn't mean others can't. If you encounter such a thing in the battle for your destiny, are you prepared to risk your life to discuss it with your enemies? Of course, you have to think of a way to prepare for it. Even if you can't get it, you have to find a way to understand its functions, advantages, and disadvantages. This might even save your life at a critical moment. Alice blinked her big eyes and listened in silence. At this moment, she vaguely understood the difference between her and Grimm's master. Initiative attitude, sensitivity to things, and pragmatism. For any new knowledge or item, he would first match it with terms such as combat, strengthening, practicality, and magic crystals. If there was a high degree of overlap, he would immediately use 200% of his enthusiasm to grasp it. If there was a low degree of overlap, he would not even bother with it. This was not how a magus should think. Then I'll leave this matter to you. Grimm ordered concisely. You're also a witch, so it should be easy for you to talk to the other witches. I'll leave it to you to figure out everything about this temporary spell formation. What about you? Alice instantly felt a headache coming on, and she muttered unhappily. Me? Of course I'm going on a date. After saying this, Grimm's face, which was hidden under the shadow of his hood, revealed an ambiguous smile. Go, go. Be careful that they don't eat you, Alice said bitterly, puffing her cheeks. Grimm grinned, turned around, and walked into the forest not far away. Night fell. As the humidity gradually rose from the ground, the originally dark forest became even more gloomy and terrifying. Grimm stepped on the slightly sticky soil, parted the thin mist, and slowly walked in the dark forest. It was not that there was no light in the surroundings. The slightly cold fluorescent moss, the luminous mushroom that was as bright as a light bulb, and the colorful fluorescent plants that were full of gorgeous colors. In this black forest, anything that was too bright and eye-catching should not be too close. This was something that every magus who entered the black forest needed to know and understand. Bright meant poison. Eye-catching meant trap. Both of these things meant big trouble. Grimm lifted his nose and sniffed lightly. There was a hint of a woman's body fragrance in the stale and oppressive smell of the forest. There was a line of footprints on the dark ground, slowly disappearing into the forest on the left. This place was at least 5 miles away from the campsite, and even the witches who came out to look for resources would not go so far. Grimm hesitated for a moment, and finally began to think about whether it was a wise decision to come to the date. However, just as he was thinking about whether he should give up, the sound of splashing water penetrated through the hazy mist and slowly entered his ears. In the sound of the water, Grimm could faintly hear an ethereal voice. It was the sweet voice of a woman. The highlight of the show was here. With a cold smile, Grimm's body was surrounded by a faint red barrier, and the mist parted as he walked in the direction of the voice. It was a small pool embedded in the middle of the forest. The moonlight was cold, and the pool water was cold. Tall trees grew around the pool, and huge umbrellas were put together, leaving only a bowl-sized gap above the pool. A circle of silver light shone down from above, like a bright pillar of light in the middle of a dark stage. It reflected a naked, beautiful woman who was bending over to take a bath. Under the light of the pale blue moonlight, the woman's tight skin reflected a silver-white luster, making her shine like a beautiful doll. As if she had heard Grimm's footsteps, the beautiful woman straightened her body in the knee-deep pool. She flung her wet blonde hair behind her and smiled at Grim, who was standing by the side of the pool. No matter from the perspective of a human or a magus, the witch in front of him was undoubtedly a beauty. She had towering breasts, a slender waist, long legs, smooth skin, a beautiful face, and a perfectly proportioned body. She was the ideal lover in every aspect, especially when she stood in the pool with her head held high under Grim's unscrupulous gaze. The strong temptation and impulse could turn any man into an irrational beast. "This is my offer, Lord Grim. As long as you're willing to give up on that little girl, I'm willing to accompany you through this long journey in the forest." The beautiful witch licked her red lips as she said this. "I can let you do whatever you want. Asterisk. I like this plan." Grim's smile became even brighter. He took off his hood, revealing his handsome face under the cold moonlight. His eyes flashed with intelligence. His face was cold and ruthless, and he had a devilish smile on his face, coupled with his 2-meter-tall, well-built body. At this moment, Grim's scholarly aura and masculine aura mixed together, attracting the beautiful witch's gaze and Gushijio's gaze. She did not expect this wizard who had been hiding his face to be such a charming guy. The eyes of the witch in the pool became passionate and intense. "If you're willing, I can be your regular companion. Sometimes, I can even become your maid." For no reason, the breeze that blew across the pool became a little hot. "That's still not good enough." Grim's calm eyes darted around. But what was rather strange was that even when he was calmly looking at the most soul-stirring parts of the beautiful witch's body, his eyes were still calm and without any ripples. It was as if the beautiful body in front of him could not arouse his desire at all. Chapter 349. The water was clear, and the moonlight was hazy. However, the witch in the water became more and more serious. "What do you want?" The witch finally asked the question in her heart. "You're not naive enough to think that by controlling a little witch in your hands, and then pushing her to the throne of the fate, you'll be able to get a powerful maid, right? What if that's what I'm thinking?" "Huh," the witch sneered. "Then I'll advise you to learn more about the history of the Destiny Witches. Don't you know that all witches are only loyal to one person, and that is the Great Witch King? No matter how strong the contract you use to bind her, the moment she becomes a Destiny Witch, all the restrictions on her soul will disappear." "Then what do you suggest?" Grim looked up at the sky. "If you have something to say it quickly. I'm in a hurry to eat." Suppressing the anger in her heart, the witch picked up a thin robe from the rock beside the pool and draped it over her body, allowing the wet cloth to perfectly adhere to her beautiful body. She slowly walked in front of Grim and looked into his black eyes, a beautiful smile on her face once again. "You're a very interesting wizard and very strong." The witch stretched out her slender fingers, as if she wanted to touch Grim's strong muscles. However, as soon as her fingertips touched the red barrier, they suddenly shrank back in pain. The witch put her red fingertip in her mouth and gently sucked on it. She smiled charmingly and said, "No one can control a witch's fate completely. However, if you can support me, I can be your secret lover for 3 years. Also, I can promise you everything you've agreed to with that little witch." "That's how you pulled that wizard over?" Grim asked calmly. The witch's eyes lit up as if she had discovered something. She could not help but giggle. "What are you thinking? That person is my brother. He loves me the most. Then tell him to let his sister wear more clothes the next time she goes out. I'm not interested in smelly meat that has been modified by witchcraft." With that, Grim's figure flickered, and he turned into a ball of flames that leaped away from his original spot, dodging the sneak attack of the 2 green lights. The 2 green lights failed in their sneak attack, so they made a turn in the air and flew back to the witch's side, landing on her shoulder. Grim's body reappeared 20 meters away. When his eyes fell on the 2 little green creatures on the witch's shoulder, he couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. Green elf? The green elf was a special plant-type magical creature. She was only the size of a palm and looked like a naked human girl with cicada wings on her back. However, It didn't have a gentle and kind personality like the flower spirits that fed on pollen and nectar. Instead, it was a carnivorous, magical creature. It had a vicious nature, flew swiftly, and its claws were naturally poisonous. Although the green elves were not powerful monsters, once they caught up to them, the attackers would not have the time to defend against the witch's witchcraft. Seeing the witch's ashen face, Grim chuckled, and his body turned into a ball of flames once again. The next moment, he appeared in the distant forest. When Grim's figure disappeared into the depths of the dark forest, a thin black figure appeared nearby. "Is there a need to do this, Ina?" The black figure came to the witch's side, staring at the dazzling flames that were slowly dissipating in the depths of the forest. "When the Tower of Destiny opens, no external force will be able to help you. Even if you have the help of this wizard, what use will it be?" "No, you don't know." The witch's charming eyes suddenly turned sharp. "That girl is different from the others. She might be the scariest competitor." The black figure was slightly stunned. "Scarier than that Shue Fu? You can't compare them like that." The witch shook her head in distress, as if there was something she couldn't figure out herself. "The snow witch Shue Fu is strong enough, but she doesn't give me this kind of pressure from the depths of my soul. As for that little girl..." The witch mumbled for a long time, but she didn't know how to describe the feeling that came from the depths of her soul. "Don't tell me you really like that wizard." The black figure finally couldn't help but ask, the jealousy in his voice obvious. The sharp look in the witch's eyes disappeared and was replaced by a charming look that could charm a man to death. "Brother, are you jealous?" Before she could finish speaking, her delicate red lips were violently sealed by the other party. "You're mine. You'll always be mine." Heavy breathing could be heard clearly, followed by beast-like roars and roars. The robe that they had just put on was instantly torn into pieces, and the two naked bodies were entangled together, falling into the pool. Soon, the mirror-like surface of the pool began to shake violently. The two green elves flapped their cicada-like wings and shot into the surrounding forest like arrows, hiding in the boundless darkness. Two shameless people. Alice couldn't help but cover her big and bright eyes with her hands, cursing bitterly. However, the gap left behind by her hands to cover her eyes was too big. It seemed as if nothing could be blocked. As she cursed, she did not forget to record all of this in the image recording crystal. Thinking that Grim would be back soon, Alice quickly took out a small bag and wrapped up all the broken pieces of the tortoise shell on the floor of the carriage. She then sneaked back to the campfire. Taking advantage of her wizard's privileges, Alice bought a chestnut guinea fowl from the half-werewolf mercenary by robbing and buying it from him. The guinea fowl's innards had been dug out and replaced with egg-sized mushrooms and chestnuts. Alice roasted it over the campfire, using a brush dipped in spices to spread it evenly. Golden fat flowed out continuously, and when the campfire gently licked it, it made a soft, sizzling sound. The rich aroma of roasted chicken lingered in the air above the camp. Half a quarter of an hour later, as soon as Grim stepped into the camp, he was greeted by a perfectly roasted chicken that was shining with a golden luster. "Hurry up and eat it. I specially left it for you." Alice licked her lips with an indifferent expression. Grim smiled slightly, tearing off the fattest drumstick and handing it to Alice. Alice immediately received it with a smile and started to eat it in big bites. Her mouth was full of food, but she still muttered something like, "At least you know what's good for you." Of course, this scene that happened next to the bonfire was also captured by countless eyes. Putting down the tent, an old witch complained indignantly, "Are these the witches that have popped up recently? Relying on wizards and fawning over them. They're simply a disgrace to us witches." The grade 2 dark witch Kola, who was quietly lying on a soft couch in the middle of the tent, said coldly, "Laura, don't complain. As far as I know, this girl called Alice is a hot candidate for the title of Destiny Witch." "What? Just because of this girl?" The three dark witches in the tent exclaimed at the same time. "I've just paid a visit to the sage, Elsa. She told me that this Alice is one of the 3 most promising candidates for the Battle of Destiny next year." "This? The three dark witches gasped at the same time. No one would be foolish enough to doubt the words of the sage Elsa. However, the prophecies were always very different from reality, and this made the few of them a little confused. What does this Alice have? From the looks of it, she must have sacrificed all of her abilities in exchange for the blessing of destiny. But in the Tower of Destiny, that strong wizard won't be able to help her. How is she going to defend against the attacks of the wizard's pagoda's guards and competitors? That's right. Is she going to rely on that non-offensive divination spell to kill her enemies? If she enchants that platinum hammer with offensive spells, she might really be able to use it to smash her enemies to death. The dark witches teased Alice one after another. It was obvious that they were not optimistic about Alice's chances. That's right, Lady Cora. Since the sage Elsa said that there are 3 people, one of them must be Chave, who deceived the witches. Then what about the other one? A witch suddenly remembered something and asked curiously. The other one? Even the level 2 witch Cora had a distressed look on her face. That fellow is even more ridiculous than this Alice. She, what happened to her? The other 2 witches asked in unison. She actually advanced to become a berserk witch. Cora finally spat out the pent-up frustration in her chest. Berserk witch? The 3 dark witches exclaimed in unison, looking at each other, completely speechless. There were strange things every year, but not as many as this year. Why were there so many weirdos in this year's Battle of Destiny? Speaking of the berserk witch, outsiders might not be too familiar with this special profession, but all the northern witches knew it very well. As the northern witches were all made up of witches at the top of the ruling hierarchy, they had some natural disadvantages compared to the wizard group in terms of the combination of professions and the choice of skills. That was the extreme lack of meat shields. Although the high-grade witches were all-powerful and had strange abilities, most of them were still long-range attacks and support attacks. Once a group battle was needed, the shortcomings of not having a top meat shield became very obvious. The wizard system had anatomy refinery wizards as meat shields, and when necessary, puppet wizards and bloodline wizards could also hold up for a while. But what did the witches have? In order to solve this problem, the high-grade witches racked their brains and unexpectedly developed a new way to advance the profession of the berserk witch. No matter which faction of apprentice witches, when they advanced, they could choose to advance to a berserk witch. Once a berserk witch stepped on a battlefield, she could transform all her witchcraft power into a violent and unparalleled force, turning into an invincible and terrifying female warrior, sweeping the entire battlefield. They had strong magic resistance, and after going berserk, their magic resistance could be increased by another level, which allowed them to ignore almost any attack from opponents of the same level. However, their own witchcraft attack ability would also disappear at the same time, leaving only their physical attack ability. But this was enough. Of course, the berserk, which was also a profession worthy of the respect of all witches. Without their sacrifice, there would be no safe space for their companions to cast spells. But a fate witch candidate becoming a berserk witch who smashed people with a stick, this was still too subversive. Chapter 350. The trade route in the Black Forest was a safe passage that countless wizards had explored with their lives for thousands of years. However, this so-called safety was only in a relative sense, and no one could guarantee absolute safety. After all, most of the forest roads were between the territories of some powerful monsters, and it was impossible for the monsters to completely follow the boundaries of the map when hunting. Therefore, once they encountered a high-level monster on the journey, losing some goods and resources was still a small matter, but often the whole caravan would mysteriously disappear. Therefore, as the guardian witches of the caravan, every time they left the tribe, it was necessary to pay a special visit to the tribe's sage or prophet. Although most of the sage and prophet's levels were not high, even the high-grade witches did not dare to ignore their advice. After all, it was an important hint related to their lives. It was unknown whether it was because of the blessing of the Dark Witch Sage, or because there were too many Fate Witch candidates in the team, But the caravan led by Witch Kara had a smooth journey. Although they encountered some attacks from wild monsters on the journey, they were still within the scope of the witch's control. Therefore, after a long journey of 87 days, the caravan finally walked out of the area covered by the Black Forest. The green and white path gradually began to widen, and many forks extended in different directions. On the way, the number of people coming and going gradually increased. When they first left the Black Forest, most of the people they met were hunting teams dressed as mercenaries. Each team would more or less see the figure of a witch apprentice. When they saw the caravan, they would wave to salute these brave warriors who dared to pass through the Black Forest. It could be seen that the witches of various factions were getting along harmoniously here. At least in the communication between the low-grade witches, Grimm did not find too obvious signs of hatred and filth. From the moment they passed through the Black Forest, they had set foot in the territory of the Northern Witches. The first city to welcome them was Dean City, which was managed by the Witch Council. Dean City did not belong to any branch of witches, but was directly managed by the Witch Council. It was somewhat similar to the public cities in the central part of the continent. Here, all the witch factions had to obey the management of the Witch Council and could not disobey the Witch Council's decrees. As for the managers of the city, they were drawn from the various witch factions and took turns to oversee the city. The manager of Dean City for the past 10 years was a Tier 3 witch from the Witch of Pain family. Before entering Dean City, the lone witch jumped off the carriage and left the caravan without looking back. After a while, the male and female magus who claimed to be brother and sister also secretly left the team. Looking at the direction in which they left, it was not much different from the route of the witch, so it was easy to imagine what would happen next. The dark witches in the caravan saw this scene and shook their heads, feeling that it was unwise for the first witch to leave. As long as she remained in the caravan, the dark witch had the obligation to help her because of the contract. Even if they entered Dean City, the witches would still kill each other in the land under the direct jurisdiction of the witches. Therefore, her safety was guaranteed to a certain extent. But she had left alone, and she had even taken the 2 wizards with her. Everyone could imagine what would happen next, even if they closed their eyes. A witch of fate candidate who could not get the blessing of fate. If she died, then she died. But what surprised them the most was that just near the entrance of Dean City, the last pair of wizards also said their goodbyes, then mixed into the bustling crowd and left. There was no need to care about the strange gazes behind them. Grimm and Alice did not enter Dean City, but instead went west along the city wall, then turned north and followed the road to the hinterland of the Northern Witches. As they walked, they could vaguely hear the conversation between the 2 people. "Why don't you enter Dean City? Don't you know that those 3 guys are waiting for us outside?" It seemed to be Alice's voice. "They are waiting for us, and we are also waiting for them. If they really dare to come, then we will beat them to a pulp. Anyway, you should sharpen your fighting skills a long time ago." 3 days later, at night, in a forest clearing close to the main road. Because it was convenient to enter and exit, and there was a small spring nearby, there were a lot of businessmen camping here. When night fell, 4 or 5 groups of people had chosen to stay here to rest. Their arrival made the small campsite bustling with noise and excitement. This was the territory of the witches, so there were no bandits or robbers. So even if they were strangers, they were quite friendly and enthusiastic when they talked to each other. Those who came first were washing their faces, filling water, and preparing dinner. As soon as they stepped into the camp, someone would greet them warmly and invite them to have dinner together. They set up piles of bonfires and cooked the food they brought. The rich aroma and cheerful laughter floated over the camp. When Grimm and Alice followed the aroma and slowly walked into the small camp, the travelers around the bonfires were stunned. Although Grimm and Alice were wearing travelers' cloaks that covered their gorgeous wizard robes, the smooth satin surface of the black cloaks and the golden edges were enough to show that they were not ordinary people. Besides, with Grimm's burly body and calm temperament, as well as Alice's special attire, it was impossible to hide their identities as wizards. The people in the camp were obviously not mentally prepared for the arrival of the 2 wizards. A witch apprentice mixed in the crowd was so nervous that she was at a loss. She quickly stood up and bowed to the two. In the north, although the status of witches was much higher than that of wizards, a small witch apprentice was not qualified to put on airs in front of two wizards. We've just arrived from the central continent. We need to know more about the situation of the organization here. Can you tell us about it? Grim didn't show up anymore. Instead, Alice was the one to talk to the others. After all, Alice was a witch, so she was obviously more respected in the north than a wizard, so it was better for her to talk to them. It's Naya's honor to serve my lord. My lords, please come and sit here. The witch apprentice immediately greeted the two warmly. There was also a bonfire in a place on the side of the camp that was not windy. This place was originally occupied by the leader of a small caravan. When he saw the two wizards, he quickly gave up the best spot. In terms of status, the leader of the small caravan was slightly higher than the witch apprentice. After all, she was hired by the caravan. However, when faced with such a situation, only this novice which was qualified to sit down and talk with the two official wizards. After the caravan leader moved to another bonfire, he quickly sent someone to deliver mushroom soup and roasted lamb chops. The three of them sat around the small bonfire, eating and chatting. The atmosphere was calm and peaceful. Apprentice Naya looked at the two wizards curiously and asked politely, "What do you want to know, my lords?" The two wizards were tall and short, one big and one small. From their appearance, they really looked like a father and daughter who came out to travel. However, the handsome wizard inevitably looked too young, and the little, which was not only petite, but even the way she spoke and acted was no different from a 7 or 8-year-old girl. However, he knew that there were no ordinary people who could become wizards. How could an 8-year-old girl become a wizard? This was simply making a fool out of the profession of wizards. So, although the little, which in front of them looked young, who knew if she was already a few hundred years old, Apprentice Naya, who knew that he could not judge a book by its cover, could only respectfully offer his respect to the two wizards. We just want to understand the situation of the nearby organizations and what special resources there are around. Alice did not touch the lamb chops. She tasted the mushroom soup and felt that it tasted good, so she said casually while sipping it lightly, "Then let me introduce to you, my lord. The place where we are now is between Dean City and Ancona City. Dean City is a city that must be passed in and out of the north, so both of you must have visited when you came here. Go north along this road for another half a day, and you will leave Dean City and enter the territory of the Witches of Death. If you go west, it will take you about 3 days to enter the territory of the Witches of Pain. And if you go east for 2 days, you will enter the territory of the Witches of Deceit. The resources around here are also quite rich. Dean City is the place where all the inter-regional caravans gather, and almost all the resources in the north can be found there. If both of you want to collect some resources, it will be easier there. In the north, in addition to the wizard towers in the major cities, there are many witches who like to find a secluded place to build a magic hut and then indulge in their favorite research. If a wizard visits them, they will be happy to exchange some knowledge with you. There's a place called Nora, 200 miles northwest of this trade route. There's a lucky spring that appears from time to time. It is said that drinking the spring water will bring you good luck for a year. 300 miles to the east from here, there's an obelisk left behind by an ancient witch. It will give witches who touch it a special kind of spiritual enlightenment. XX miles southwest, XX miles northeast. Grim and Alice listened quietly, memorizing everything Naya had said without missing a single word. Although Alice was born here, she was taken away from the north when she was very young, so most of her memories of this place were very vague. Now that she heard all this, some of her childhood memories came alive again. After Naya finished, Grim took out a map of the north and asked her to mark the location of the witch's hut. Only then did he nod with satisfaction. Alice took out 10 magical crystals from her bosom and handed them to Naya, who accepted them with a face full of joy. Naya only had the strength of an intermediate apprentice. She was hired by a small caravan and only earned 8 magic crystals after running around for more than 10 days. Now that she could earn 10 magic crystals just by saying a few simple words, she was immediately overjoyed. At this time, Grim slightly frowned and turned his head to the southeast. He turned back and made eye contact with Alice. Then both of them stood up at the same time. Tell the people in this camp to not step out of the camp tonight. No matter how big the commotion outside is, don't go out to check. Give this to the caravan leader as payment for tonight's meal. Alice took out 2 more magic crystals and threw them into Naya's arms. Then, she turned around and silently walked into the darkness of the night with Grim. Chapter 351. The location of the duel was 2 miles southeast of the camp in the forest. This was a spacious grassland with no one around. When Grim and Alice arrived one after the other, the brother and sister pair were already waiting there quietly. You really kept your promise. The elder brother took off his hood, revealing a pair of strange black eyes that had no white in them. He said coldly, "This is the northern land. If you start a massacre here, you will be hunted down by the witches. So, this is a good place for us to solve our problems." After 3 months of contact, both sides had a certain understanding of each other. Although they could not find out more about each other's secrets, they already knew each other's basic abilities. In the eyes of the brother and sister pair, Grim was a simple fire wizard, one that specialized in elements. Although this would make his attacks more powerful, it would also make it easy for the enemy to target him. Alice, on the other hand, did not have any combat power. She only had some auxiliary methods to protect herself. As for the brother and sister pair, Grim and Alice had already figured out their background. The brother was called Bill, and he had only become a wizard for about 10 years. He was an inferior wizard who specialized in body modification. In order to infinitely strengthen himself, he had replaced his original body organs with the organs of some monsters, so he had some special abilities similar to those of monsters. His pure black eyes were also known as shadow eyes. They could covertly transform dark matter into terrifying shadow creatures. After his body was strengthened by the magic organs, he also had terrifying strength, super high agility, and amazing vitality. But inferior was inferior. Even if he used the magic transformation method to make himself far stronger than ordinary wizards, he could not change the deep contradiction between the magic organs, which was difficult to reconcile. This was an unwise way to increase his current combat power, but give up on future development. As for the sister who had tried to seduce Grim, she was called Amanda. She specialized in herbology and was good at making all kinds of potions. Seeing that the 2 enemies were already in position, Alice could not help but sneer. Why only 2? Didn't the 3 of you come together? Call the witch out too. The siblings looked at each other. Avatar shook his head and smiled bitterly. Everyone knows each other. It's hard to hide anything. Doris, come out. Let these 2 fellows see our true strength. Following her shout, a lonely figure walked out of the forest behind Grim and Alice. It was the witch who was alone. You guys are very wise. Alice couldn't help but mock. You know that we're stronger than you, so you actually know how to work together. What's the matter? Are you going to split the spoils after defeating us? I'm guessing that you'll definitely lose. Alice's finger was pointing at Doris, who was all alone. You don't have to use this sowing of discord anymore. We've already discussed it and signed the contract. Before you die, we will not attack each other. Avatar snorted coldly. Who would have thought that a weakling without any combat ability like you would be ranked as one of the 3 most likely to succeed by those idiots? I didn't know if I should laugh at their stupidity or at their ridiculous fate. Anyway, you must die today. If that's the case, then what's the point of talking nonsense? Hurry up and fight. Following Alice's scream, she threw out a dazzling fiery red crystal. In the next second, the terrifying body of the Inferno Tyrant appeared in the middle of the field, surrounded by flames. The air in the battlefield immediately became unbearably hot. The wizard named Bill looked at Grim and smiled sinisterly. You're very brave, but not wise. As the dark whirlpool in his eyes spun rapidly, the shadows under Grim and Alice twisted. From the originally empty shadows, black shadows with sharp fangs and claws emerged and pounced towards the two of them. Wizard Bill's black eyes flashed as he desperately urged the shadow creatures to attack his opponents. On the other hand, he did not put all his hopes on these shadow creatures. Instead, he let out a violent roar. In short, thick black hair quickly grew on his face and body. In just a few short seconds, Wizard Bill, who was still in his human form, had already transformed into a walking Black Panther. His claws and feet flashed with a blue luster unique to poisonous elements, and he roared as he rushed forward. The female potion Master Amanda's fingers were also flying, and small bottles of reagent were thrown in the middle of the battlefield. Then, they exploded one after another and shot out strange mucus. The mucus seemed to have a life of its own as it flowed and converged together. From inside, 4 strange human figures crawled out. The outside of their bodies was a translucent mucus that looked like mucus, and the inside was a mixture of rotten branches, rotten leaves, sand, mud, earthworms, and other strange substances. They had heads, torsos, and limbs, and their appearance was no different from that of a normal human. However, their sticky heads did not have any facial features, and their bodies did not have any genders. As soon as they crawled up, they pounced towards Alice with heavy footsteps. As they advanced, they threw balls of rotten liquid filled with a foul smell from their hands. There were also a few small potion bottles that were tossed near Alice, bursting out with strange grayish-black halos. Very quickly, Alice's spiritual world was tainted with a gray darkness. Doris, who was blocking behind Grim and Alice, stood still silently. It seemed like she was only guarding against the two of them running away, and she had no intention of making a move. Seeing that the enemies had already made their move, Grim did not plan to hide his strength anymore. To be honest, although the 3 people in front of them outnumbered them, in the end, they were only 2 new wizards who had just advanced for less than 3 years. That Bill's strength was only comparable to that of a veteran wizard. Grim, on the other hand, was someone who could kill elite wizards. Amichuo, Flame, Foot of the Lost, as he quickly chanted a short spell, an invisible volcano seemed to erupt in Grim's body. A huge amount of fire elemental energy did not come from the outside world, but from his body. The bright red flames instantly ignited everything in the surroundings, and Grim's body began to expand in the raging flames. His 2-meter-tall body was not considered small among wizards, but with the expansion of the fire energy, Grim turned into a terrifying 4-meter-tall flame giant in the blink of an eye. A huge amount of fire elemental energy condensed on the surface of his body, forming a new flaming shell. Asterisk bang bang bang. Asterisk 4 1-meter-wide and 2-meter-tall flame shields condensed purely from static flames shot out and began to rapidly revolve around Grim's huge body. And that was not the end. A red flame barrier began to spread rapidly in all directions with Grim as the center, and in the blink of an eye, it covered the land and sky within a radius of half a mile. With the high temperature and flames wreaking havoc, everything inside began to spontaneously combust. The first to bear the brunt of this was the brother and sister pair. Countless shadow creatures that had just jumped out from the shadows under Grim did not even have the chance to attack before their black cotton-like bodies were ignited by the terrifying flames. When the air around Grim turned red from the heat, the beastified Bill's body turned into a ray of black light, brushing past Grim's flame shield. Asterisk poo-pu. Asterisk 2 muffled explosions sounded out. The 2 flame shields were torn apart by Bill's sharp claws, exploding into sparks that filled the sky. Bill let out a muffled groan and suddenly appeared 100 meters behind Grim, glaring at him with a sinister expression. Large areas of the fur on his shiny black body were also charred. Seeing the power of Grim's flame sorcery, Bill's long and narrow face revealed a cruel and vicious expression. He used his beast-like claws to take out a fiery red crystal leaf from his waist pouch. He stuffed the crystal leaf into his mouth and swallowed it. A crimson ring of fire resistance immediately erupted from his body. His enchanted body already had a slight elemental resistance, And now with the fire dragon grass that he had specially bought, Bill's fire resistance had skyrocketed. He was no longer afraid of Grimm's omnipresent flame barrier. Feeling the fire poison in his body being quickly expelled, the scorching heat that had made it hard to breathe had now turned into a warm breeze. Bill grinned and bent down. His thick hind legs stomped hard on the scorched ground, and his whole body immediately turned into a ray of black light, pouncing towards Grimm. Behind him was a crater that was 1/2 meter in size, and its surroundings were densely packed with terrifying cracks that resembled spiderwebs. From this, it could be seen that the beastified Bill had an astonishing strength and physique. "Idiot, are you still delusional enough to fight 1 against 3? After going berserk, my strength is no less than that of a physique refiner wizard. Today, Bill shouted crazily while circling around Grimm, destroying one flame shield after another. However, before he could finish his words, Grimm, who had turned into a giant flaming man, inserted his giant hand into the ground and condensed a super huge lava shield from the boiling red lava. He then swung both his hands at Bill's face. A muffled bang sounded. Bill, who could not stop his momentum, smashed the lava shield head-on. His whole body staggered and fell to the ground, sliding for at least 30 to 40 meters. When he propped up his body with difficulty and pulled his bloody face out of the mud, the blood that had just been blocked immediately gushed out like a flood. His tall nose bridge had also become twisted and crooked, already broken into 3 or 4 pieces. Damn it, what's going on? How did that guy's strength and speed suddenly become so strong? Bill angrily spat out the mud in his mouth, but he was shocked to find that there were 2 fangs with traces of blood in them. Chapter 352. The Black Panther lowered its body slightly, its belly sticking to the ground as it roared angrily. However, he did not dare to charge forward again. Just now, this terrifying fireman that he thought had seen through all of his abilities suddenly exploded with an even more powerful force. His originally slow and stiff movements were propelled by the rapid increase in strength and agility, and he suddenly became unprecedentedly agile and violent. He actually used the hilariously clumsy lava shield to send him flying. If not for the fact that his physique after going berserk had given him a strong physique that allowed him to fight against mid-tier demons, that blow just now would have shattered his skull and killed him. Although the injuries on his face were huge, Bill's physique was as high as 8 points, and his physique as a Black Panther had shockingly high recovery speed. Bill roared on the ground, and the fur on his claws gradually began to recede, returning to the shape of a human hand. Bill endured the excruciating pain and used his hands to put the broken nose bridge, which had been broken into 3 or 4 pieces, back to its original position. Then, with the powerful recovery speed of his high physique, the injuries on his face quickly healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although this kind of self-healing was very effective, the pain it brought was also doubled. After the treatment, Bill roared at the sky again. Short, thick, and black beast fur once again covered his hands, and sharp, curved claws quickly grew out. The Black Panther paused for a moment, and with strength in its limbs, it once again turned into a shadow as swift as the wind, quickly running around Grimm. Although the fire demon that Grimm had transformed into was huge, it was not clumsy. Propelled by the pure flame energy of the fire demon's heart, and supported by the rapid increase in its basic stats, the 4-meter-tall ferocious fire demon held a thick lava shield in one hand and waved a 20-meter-long flame whip in the other. It looked like a demon that could incinerate the world as it fought the Black Panther. The fire wizard actually had such terrifying strength after going berserk. This was clearly out of the expectations of the 3 attackers. After all, with their divination abilities, it was already very good that they could see through Grimm's apparent strength. To be honest, they were not qualified to see through all of Grimm's trump cards. On the other side, Avatar, who was struggling to avoid the Inferno Tyrant's pursuit, screamed angrily at Doris, who was not far away. "Hurry up and help him, bitch. Do you want all 3 of us to die here?" Hearing her curse, Doris, who had been watching from the back, had her facial muscles twitch a few times. Although he wanted the two of them to suffer a little more, it was just as Amanda had said. If Bill could not handle the fire wizard, then it would be impossible to kill Alice successfully, and this price was something neither of the two witches present could afford. Since Alice could be recognized as one of the three most likely to become a destiny, which she definitely had a stronger destiny than the other two present. This was absolutely not allowed. Although she didn't have an obedient brother like Amanda, Doris was no less blessed by fate than Amanda. As long as they could kill Alice, who was much stronger than the two of them, Doris believed that she still had a good chance of winning. So, looking up at the two battlefields on her left and right, Doris shook her black robe and stretched out her right hand, which was covered in strange rune lines. She spread her fingers and waved them, as she softly chanted an obscure and mysterious witchcraft incantation. A formless air ripple spread towards the Balrog that was madly chasing after the Black Panther. Grim, who had transformed into a Balrog, was waving a flaming whip and smashing the charred ground into pieces. As the Black Panther was fleeing too quickly, the long whip that had transformed into streaks of red lightning could not catch up with its agile body, and it landed on empty ground every time. However, the Black Panther's strong body did not dare to stop at all, and it had to constantly change its position. Once it slowed down, the flaming whip would hit its body. The terrifying pain was secondary, but the most frightening thing was the sharp decrease in speed. This was because what he had to face next was the lava shield that was as thick as a city wall in the Balrog's other hand. Damn it, that wasn't a shield at all, but a small mountain burning with flames. Even with his physique, being hit by would break his bones and tear his tendons, and the pain would be heart-wrenching. Just as Grim was unscrupulously chasing after the Black Panther, the transparent ripple engulfed his body. The dense fire barrier around his body was ineffective. The huge lava shield was ineffective, and the rapidly spinning flame shield was ineffective. Even his body of flames could not stop the transparent ripple from penetrating his body. Grim's vision blurred, and the Black Panther that was running left and right in front of him suddenly split into two, running in two different directions. Just as he was slightly stunned, the Black Panthers that had fled to the left and right actually split into four again. The four Black Panthers raised their necks and roared, then turned around and charged at Grim at the same time. Grim waved his long whip with all his might, and the flaming tongue that resembled red lightning smashed two of the Black Panther's shadows in the air. Grim had just raised the huge shield in his other hand when the sharp air ripple swept across his left shoulder and left rib, and hot lava blood gushed out. Grim angrily stomped his foot, and countless pillars of lava shot out in front of him and behind him. He took the opportunity to crouch down and use the lava shield to protect half of his body. He then scooped up a large amount of sticky lava from the pool of lava and smeared it on his wounds. What's going on? Is it an illusion or a cloning skill? Chip, check quickly. Grim roared in his mind as he healed himself. Beep. Unknown force field detected. The source is 316 meters behind host's right. The force field will continue to affect host's spatial perception. Suggested for host to eliminate the source of the force field as soon as possible. Grim turned around. Doris, who was casting spells at him with one hand at the edge of the battlefield, immediately entered his sight. However, just as he was trying his best to lock onto her position, his vision blurred again. Everything in his field of vision turned upside down, and he could not tell the distance between them. Grim tried his best to focus, and the secret voodoo scroll instantly appeared in his hands. At the same time, a small area of crimson flame storm bloomed at the position he had locked onto. Grim, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to kill me too? Alice's sharp curses came from the area where the crimson flame storm was wreaking havoc. Damn it, damn it, damn it, Grim couldn't help but curse out loud. Although he had already locked on to the enemy, he could not be sure if the enemy was Doris, who he wanted to deal with. Under the influence of the illusion, everything he saw and sensed was chaotic and upside down. In this chaotic and disorderly world, some were real, some were illusory, and some were distorted. This kind of illusion that hid the truth within the truth immediately caught Grimm's attention. He waved his giant shield and long whip, but it was futile as he chased after the illusions that were easily broken with a single poke. His body was in intense pain from time to time. The crisscrossing claw marks had left him with cuts and bruises all over his body. If not for Black Panther Bill being wary of Grimm's counterattack, he would have taken advantage of the moment when Grimm was confused to injure him severely. Alice, hide a little further away. Using the soul contract between the two, Grimm quickly sent a telepathic message to Alice. Without waiting for her reply, Grimm suddenly crouched down and flipped through the pages of the secret voodoo scroll in his hand before finally stopping on a page. Isaac, Herman, Crimson World. As he chanted a few simple sentences of witchcraft, a large-scale fire spell was activated with him as the center and covered a radius of 300 meters. The previously dark sky was now occupied by rolling black and red clouds of fire. Lava fireballs the size of human heads streaked across the sky and landed on the ground, dragging long tails of black smoke behind them. Every fireball that hit the ground meant a violent explosion and a raging flame shockwave. Of course, there were also lava fragments flying everywhere and a scarlet lava rain. Forced into a corner by the enemy, Grimm could only activate the only large-scale spell in the secret voodoo scroll, Meteor Shower. After losing the ability to sense space, only a large-scale, indiscriminate attack like this could interrupt the enemy's mental interference. A moment later, Grimm's spirit trembled, and the chaotic world in front of him returned to normal. In the distance, a lava fireball fell just 5 steps away from Doris. The violent explosion and shockwave interrupted her channeling, allowing Grimm to break free from her mental illusion. Doris's black robe was scorched by the raging flames, but with the flame amulet around her neck, she was able to avoid some of the fire damage. Her body trembled, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. She had suffered the corresponding backlash because her spell was interrupted. However, this kind of damage was not enough to knock her down. In the center of the battlefield in the distance, Grimm shot a hateful glare at her through his burning eyes, which made her feel a bone-chilling chill. Damn it, I can't let him wake up. Doris tightly grasped the flame amulet in front of her chest, using it to resist the waves of raging flames. She tore off the shirt on her right shoulder, revealing a strange rune circle drawn with mysterious lines. She started chanting the incantation loudly. But even though she was fast, Grimm was not slow. For the first time in his life, Grimm no longer dared to care about the 6 instant cast spells in the secret voodoo scroll. After activating the meteor fire shower, he activated another single-target spell, the molten core explosion, almost without stopping. In the distance, Doris quickly chanted the incantation. She only needed the last 2 syllables to complete it, but a strong sense of death that made her hair stand on end instantly enveloped her body. Damn it, Doris did not have the time to activate the enchantment spell on her body. She rolled on the ground and ran away without caring about her image. Bang! A muffled sound echoed throughout the battlefield. The place where Doris was standing a moment ago was glowing red. A huge amount of fire elemental energy was bound by a powerful force, and a 1-meter-wide black hole was formed in the air half a meter above the ground. Following that, a terrifyingly high-temperature flame gushed out like a tide, vaporizing everything within a 2-meter radius. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.